Chapter 1780. I did it, I really did it. In the cultivation room, Nietian successfully merged the cosmic lines and created a small space-time. He was so excited that he was shouting and yelling. The fat cat was completely stiff at the side, and its eyeballs could not move. After a long time, Nietian finally calmed down a little. Seeing the fat cat petrified on the spot, he could not help but ask in shock, "Fat, are you okay?" Hearing Nietian's voice, the fat cat reacted. It gulped and said, I'm okay. That's good. Nietian was too excited. He smiled proudly and rotated the spherical space-time with his fingertips. He said, How is it? I successfully merged the cosmic lines and created a space-time. Yes. Good, very good. The fat cat nodded repeatedly, unable to hide its excitement. Fat, what should I do next? Nietian was very proud and said, Should I continue to extract cosmic lines and create a space-time? Yes. The fat cat nodded with a smile and said, You need to create a space-time with a radius of about 5,000 meters. A radius of 5,000 meters. Nietian was suddenly stunned, and his face darkened. The spherical space at his fingertips was only the size of a finger, and it had already taken him a lot of effort to create a space-time with a radius of 5,000 meters. It was simply asking for his life. At least 5,000 meters, or it will not be able to contain so many exotic flowers and plants. The fat cat laughed and said, Let's get to work. Okay. Nietian nodded heavily. It turned out that the fat cat wanted him to create a space-time to contain the exotic flowers and plants obtained from the Holy Mother of Jiuying. However, Nietian was very puzzled. Without anything else, what was the difference between keeping the exotic flowers and plants in the space-time he created and keeping them in a space ring? Although he had doubts, he still did as he was told. To be able to create a space-time with his own hands was a great sense of accomplishment. Next, Nietian really began to create space-time. However, his progress was very slow. He could only create a space-time range of 1 to 200 meters every day. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Fat, this space-time is big enough now, right? Nietian felt the thumb-sized space-time ball in his hand and smiled proudly. It has a radius of about 6,000 meters. That's enough. The fat cat sensed it and nodded in satisfaction. The space-time sphere in Nietian's hand looked like it was only the size of a thumb, but the space it contained was extremely vast, and it was a space-time that was isolated from the real space-time. What's next? Nietian let out a long sigh. The creation of space-time was finally completed. The next step is simple. You just need to introduce some other things into this space-time, such as air, soil, water, and some natural energies. As long as these things exist, this space-time can barely be considered a world. The fat cat smiled and gestured for Nietian to walk out of the training room and start doing these things. Nietian was stunned for a moment. He did not expect the last step to be like this. He could not help but ask, doubtfully, If that's the case, can I put the same things in the space ring and create a space of its own? The fat cat shook its head and said, The space ring is indeed space-time, but have you ever seen a space ring with a capacity of 6,000 meters? Moreover, the space in the space ring is unstable. If you put soil or other factors in it, this space-time could collapse at any time. The space you create is different. The space-time stability is stronger than the time we are in. Even if you put a mountain in this space, there will be no problem. Nietian nodded slightly. So that's how it is. In the next few days, Nietian temporarily left the Nine-Infant Palace and went to the Nine-Infant Mountain Range to look for what he needed. He gave the world he had created a name, Nine Extremities. After a few days, Nietian returned to the training room and sensed everything in the Nine Extremities. It had already begun to take on the scale of a world. He put soil, water, air, heaven, and earth yuan qi in it. He even put a small mountain and caught many small mythological beasts in it. Nietian opened up a vast area to cultivate exotic flowers and plants. Then he spent about half a month to put all the exotic flowers and plants into the Nine Extremities. Nietian used the power of the Terra Vein source and used pure life force to restore the vitality of the exotic flowers and plants that were gradually losing vitality. The nine extremities at this time was already a world full of vitality. Nyetian carried a world with him. He put the golden lion in the nine extremities and let it keep an eye on the other mythological beasts in the nine extremities to prevent them from destroying the exotic flowers and plants. After everything was done, Nyetian felt sincerely happy. Right now, he could be said to be a person who had created a world. In the blink of an eye, Nyetian had been in the training room for almost 2 months. This was a month ahead of the time that Fat Cat had estimated. It's time to leave. Nyetian took a deep breath. His gaze was fiery and determined. He had stayed here for too long. It was time to leave. 3 days later, Nyetian and the others appeared on the empty ground in the outskirts of the Nine Infant Mountain Range. Today, they would leave the forbidden land of martialism. Nyetian, take this command medallion. The Saintess of Jiuying walked up and handed a sparkling, jade-like badge to Nyetian. She said, "There's a space-time formation in this badge. It can open a passage to the forbidden land of martialism. The forbidden land of martialism welcomes you at any time." "Thank you, Saintess." Nyetian accepted the badge and bowed to express his thanks. Then, Nyetian bid farewell to everyone. Tang 13 and Tang Yuyu did not plan to return to the Sanluo Ghost region. They planned to return to the other world. Gao Yuhan and Duan Tianhen planned to stay for now. Lan Yiru also wanted to return to her original world. Then, she would pass through the forbidden land of martialism and come to the Sanluo Ghost region to find Gue Wuchan. "Nyetian, take care," Tang 13 said heavily after arriving before Nyetian. "Don't worry. I believe we will meet again." Nyetian smiled and patted Tang 13's shoulder. Tang 13's talent in martial arts could definitely be ranked in the top 5, or even the top 3, out of everyone that Nyetian had met. In Nyetian's opinion, Tang 13 was not inferior to Lian Jiufeng. He believed that Tang 13's future achievements would be limitless. He looked forward to seeing how powerful Tang 13 would be the next time he saw her. Then, Nyetian hesitated no more. He turned around and stepped into the space-time formation. Rui Qinyu and Gue Wuchan followed. The people of the heaven of Jiuying watched from afar. They were confused and shocked. They did not know who Nyetian and the others were to be escorted by the Holy Mother of Jiuying herself. "Goodbye, everyone," Nyetian said to himself as he swept his gaze across the crowd, a faint smile on his lips. In the next instant, the space-time formation released a ray of white light. When Nyetian opened his eyes again, he was already in the sky above the Sanluo Ghost region. "Sanluo Ghost region, I'm back." Stepping into the Sanluo Ghost region again, Nyetian's mood was completely different. A name echoed in his mind: Ghost King Palace Master. The Ghost King Palace Master had captured Rui Qinyu, poisoned Ryu in Jinsu, and almost killed Tawny. Nyetian would not forget this debt. At this moment, the first thing he had to do was to find the Ghost King Palace Master for revenge. "Nyetian, you've finally appeared." However, at this moment, a deep voice came from the sky. Then, a black-clothed figure appeared. Chapter 1781. Ghost King Palace Master. Nyetian looked at the black-clothed man in midair and revealed a cold smile. Killing intent surged in his eyes. He was going to find the Ghost King Palace Master, but he did not expect the latter to appear on his own, saving him a lot of trouble. "Nyetian, you really did not disappoint me. You came out of the forbidden land of martialism alive," said the Ghost King Palace Master coldly. The Ghost King Palace Lord said coldly, his deep voice resounding through the void, revealing a bone-chilling coldness. "I said I would not disappoint you." Nyetianling sneered and said, "You've been waiting for us here for a long time, haven't you?" Nyetian spread out his consciousness and immediately sensed that there were several dozen over-god experts hidden in the air. Many of them possessed peak over-god strength. It was obvious that the people of the Ghost King Palace had been lying in ambush for a long time, waiting for Nyetian and the others to come out of the forbidden land of martialism. "I've waited for you for more than 2 months. Looks like I didn't wait in vain." The Ghost King Palace Master sneered and released all of his killing intent. An aura as violent as a stormy sea rushed towards Nietion. Nietion's eyes focused. Fearlessly, he took a step forward. A sword aura surged out and broke through the Ghost King Palace Master's violent aura. With his current strength, it was impossible for the Ghost King Palace Master to defeat him with his aura. Palace Master Ghost King had waited for more than 2 months, and Lian Jiufeng had come out 2 months ago. It was obvious that he was the one who told Palace Master Ghost King that Nietion was still alive. That was why Palace Master Ghost King had been waiting here all this time. The Ghost King Palace Master cried out in surprise. He did not expect Nietion's sword aura to be so powerful. It was beyond his expectations. His strength. The Ghost King Palace Master creased his brows. He suddenly realized that Nietion's strength had reached the mid-stage High God realm. He could not help but gasp. He clearly remembered that before Nietion entered the forbidden land of martialism, he only had the strength of a mid-stage High God. But now, in just a few months, Nietion had actually reached the mid-stage High God realm. This sort of speed of growth was simply terrifying. Ghost King Palace Lord's cold eyes couldn't help but shrink. He felt a deep fear from Nietion. Nietion, I must kill you today. The Ghost King Palace Master calmed down, and the killing intent in his eyes intensified. Only now did he realize how terrifying Nietion was. So, Nietion had to die here today. Nietion's strength had reached the mid-stage High God realm, which was indeed terrifying. But in the eyes of the Ghost King Palace Master, Nietion was still a piece of trash, an ant that could be crushed to death at any time. Do it. The Ghost King Palace Master did not wait any longer. With a low roar, the surrounding void began to tremble violently. Waves of violent aura surged from all directions like raging waves, crazily rushing towards Nietion and the others. The next moment, dozens of black-clothed martial artists appeared in the air. Each and every one of them wore a strange ghost mask, adding a tinge of eeriness to the cold atmosphere. Nietion, you will all die today. The Ghost King Palace Master sneered and retreated. He did not intend to fight personally. He was a paramount god martial artist, and it was beneath him to kill a superior god martial artist. Is that so? Nietion Tianling laughed. Sword intent surged around him. He activated the 3 evil sword seal and launched a slash. Boom! The sword's brilliance shot out 10,000 meters away. Under the dazzling light, a patch of blood appeared. A black-clothed martial artist died on the spot. Under the pressure of the sword intent, not even his bones were left. Although Nietion was only a mid-stage high god, his battle prowess was far more terrifying than regular overgods. He could kill an early overgod in a single stroke before he even used the 3 forbidden techniques. Do you think you can kill the ghost martial devil swordsman? How laughable. At the same time, Gue Wuchan's cold laughter rang out from the other side. The Octotera ghost martial artist had attacked, directly killing the 3 black-clothed martial artists in front of him with a single strike. Gue Wuchan was currently a peak overgod. Coupled with his comprehension of the way of the sword with sword essence, killing these overgods was extremely easy for him. Nietion could not help but smile wryly when he saw Gue Wuchan's attack. He thought, Gue Wuchan really is powerful. If I don't use the 3 forbidden techniques, I definitely won't be his opponent. It could be seen from his previous attack that Gue Wuchan's battle prowess was indeed above Nietion's. However, it would not necessarily be the case if Nietion used the 3 forbidden techniques. The eyes of the palace master trembled slightly. He had never thought that Nietion's battle prowess would be so terrifying. He was able to kill an overgod with a single strike as a high god. It was truly terrifying. Nietion, leave these little loaches to me. You go kill the big fish. At this moment, Gue Wuchan snickered and said to Nietion, All right. Nietion nodded slightly before glancing at Rui Qinyu. The latter smiled faintly and was extremely calm. Rui Qinyu was currently an early high god. Even if she faced an overgod, she would have no problems protecting herself. Nietion no longer hesitated. He stomped his foot, and strange black inscriptions directly surged out from his body. Damn, Brad. Are you trying to run? At this moment, a late overgod roared out and actually launched a palm strike towards Nietion. Floating in midair, Nietion felt the terrifying pressure. However, his face was as calm as still water. A fierce killing intent appeared at the corner of his mouth as he slashed out with his sword. Sword shadows whizzed out, leaving a trail of dazzling sword light in the air. What's... The person suddenly sensed something and his eyes trembled. He cried out strangely, but he was unable to say anything else. The figure was directly swallowed by the sword. How is this possible? The palace master's eyes flickered coldly when he saw this. He struggled to hide his shock. At this moment, he discovered that Nietion's strength had exploded from mid-high god to late overgod. Is it only late overgod? Nietion stabilized himself, but he could not help but smile bitterly. He was not very satisfied with his increase in strength. His Forbidden Art rune was upgraded to Mystic Middle Level. He originally thought that activating all 3 Forbidden Arts at the same time would allow his strength to reach the peak of Lord God. Nietion, what have you done? The palace master forced himself to calm down. He stared at Nietion with shining eyes as he asked sternly. He just could not understand what power could suddenly increase a person's strength by an entire major realm of cultivation. It had to be mentioned that this was late godhood. The difference between every minor realm of cultivation was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. The fact that Nietion's cultivation base had advanced by leaps and bounds was simply too terrifying. Is there a need for a dead person to know? Nietion sneered. Sword intent surged around him, and the sharpness seemed to be able to rip the surroundings apart. How arrogant! The palace master bellowed out coldly. Nietion, do you think I'll fear you just because you become a late overgod? What joke! I'd like to see how a late overgod like you can fight against me, a supreme god. With that, a black sword appeared in the palace master's hand. A strange, black presence surged on the sword, immediately filling the space with a cold intent. Nietion could not help but be stunned when he saw the sword in the palace master's hand. Chapter 1782. Palace Master Ghost King. You must have Blazing Jofing's help to restore your Yuan spirit sword, right? Nietion sneered as he stared at the palace master Ghost King. That has nothing to do with you. The Ghost King bellowed. Then, killing intent surged in his eyes as he roared. Nietion, I can kill you with one sword strike. With a roar, the Ghost King Palace Master slashed out with his sword, and a frosty sword shadow appeared. Like an enormous dragon, it shot towards Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed. Sword shadows surged around him, and he stabbed out. Boundless sword intent condensed into a 1,000-meter-long sword shadow that roared out. In the void, the 2 huge sword shadows were like 2 ancient beasts colliding with each other. Bang! In the next moment, the 2 sword shadows collided with each other, and the space suddenly froze. In an instant, it was as if time and space had stopped. Then, the terrifying sword shadows collided with each other, and the air was filled with a deafening rumbling sound. Nietion and the palace master froze in the air at the same time, releasing sword intent from their bodies. This was a battle between 2 sword intents. The sky flickered with unparalleled sword light, illuminating the entire sky. Everyone else was stunned at this scene. The shock in their hearts was written on their faces. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed that an over-god swordsman with the essence of the sword would dare to fight a supreme god swordsman with the essence of the sword. Not only was there a huge difference in strength between Nietion and the palace master, but there was also an entire realm of difference in their swordsmanship. Under these circumstances, he dared to face the palace master head-on. His courage was terrifying. Rumble! In the void, ear-piercing explosions sounded continuously. The 2 sword wills were devouring and tearing each other apart, trying to completely defeat the other. Stinking brat, you dare to fight me head-on with your abilities? Die! At this time, the Ghost King Palace Master roared, and an even more violent sword intent was released from his body, rushing towards Nietion. Nietion's gaze slightly focused, and then it became firm like killing intent. His expression was like a deep well in a cold pond, without the slightest ripple. Nietion, watch out. Thousand Leaves couldn't help but cry out when she saw this scene. Seeing this, Gue Wukon's gaze trembled, while his heart jumped up to his throat. If he was the one fighting against the Ghost King Palace Master, he would definitely choose to retreat temporarily. Although he would be injured, he wouldn't die. Gue Wuchon was a swordsman and had a keen perception of sword intent. He could feel the power of the Ghost King Palace Master's sword intent. He knew that he was unable to resist such a violent sword intent. Actually, with Nietion's capabilities, if he activated his Astral Soul Wings and Astral Soul Shield, he would definitely be able to retreat unscathed. At most, he would suffer some light injuries from the impact of the sword intent. But at this moment, his choice was not to retreat, but to fight to the death with the Ghost King Palace Master. Pooh! Puff! Puff! In the next moment, Nietion's body trembled slightly. Suddenly, endless sword intent broke out of his body and pierced through his body. Suddenly, his body turned into a sieve. Countless streams of blood spurted out and turned into surging blood chi in the air, merging with the sword intent. Although Nietion's strength and sword Dao realm were not as strong as the Ghost King Palace Master, but his martial body and sword intent were not inferior to the Ghost King Palace Master. The Ghost King Palace Master was a good opponent for Sword Dao. Nietion wanted to use the latter to prove his strength in Sword Dao. Self-igniting blood chi. Seeing this scene, the Ghost King Palace Master's eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his face suddenly became gloomy and terrifying. He didn't expect that Nietion would be so brave, self-igniting blood chi during the confrontation of sword intent. If Nietion lost at this time, even if he didn't die, he would definitely be seriously injured. Brat, since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish. The Ghost King Palace Master roared. Suddenly, an even more terrifying sword intent surged out of his body, rolling like a tide, and crazily pressed towards Nietion. Nietion's eyes trembled, but what surged out was not fear, but the most decisive killing intent. With my blood chi, stimulate my sword intent. Prove my sword Dao, proud sword unyielding. Destroy the heavens, blood devours the sky. Kill. The corner of Nietion's mouth twitched, and his thunderous voice resounded in the void. Kill, kill, kill. The killing intent was like the sea, reverberating in the space, making people feel their blood boiling, but also trembling. Boom! As soon as Nietion's voice fell, the sword intent around Shunjin was stimulated by his blood chi and started to seethe. The scarlet sword intent surged in the air and instantly condensed into a blood-colored sword shadow that was 5,000 to 6,000 meters long. The dazzling, blood-colored sword light filled the space within tens of thousands of meters, like a blood-red curtain that covered the entire heaven and earth. Everyone saw this scene, and they all gasped. It was hard to imagine that Nietion's body could burst out such a terrible power. The Ghost King Palace Master was the closest to Nietion, and he felt the sword intent around Nietion's body. The heaven-devouring sword momentum made him tremble in fear. At this moment, the Ghost King Palace Master lost his fighting spirit, and his eyes suddenly shrank, revealing great fear. However, at this time, it was completely over. The blood-red sword shadow fell like the setting sun, and the Ghost King Palace Master only felt that the world in his eyes was completely covered by dark red. At this time, he felt the most real breath of death, and the fear on his face also reached the extreme. No! At the moment of life and death, the Ghost King Palace Master screamed, and then the blood red in his eyes was magnified to the peak. The surging sword shadow fell like the sea, directly drowning the Ghost King Palace Master's figure. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. Their eyes were wide open, and their mouths were open, but no words came out. Who would have thought that the dignified Ghost King Palace Master, the top powerhouse of the Sinluo Ghost Domain, would lose to Nietion? At this time, the sword's shadow fell. The sword intent dissipated, and a figure appeared in the air, standing in the same place, like a petrified statue. Everyone looked at the figure. It was the Ghost King Palace Master. Under such a terrible sword, the Ghost King Palace Master was not directly destroyed and was still alive. Nietian looked at the Ghost King Palace Master. The corner of his mouth curved into a faint smile and murmured, "The martial body of a supreme god martial artist is really strong. Under the impact of such a sword intent, he can still withstand. Amazing." After saying that, Nietian's eyes flashed, but he didn't make a move, as if waiting for something. Nye bang! At this time, the Ghost King Palace Master's figure suddenly moved, his mouth opened, and he shouted a word, but the next moment his body suddenly shook, and suddenly the surging sword intent in his body could no longer be suppressed and exploded. In a splattering of flesh and blood, the Ghost King Palace Master exploded into a bloody light. The scene was tragic and bloody and unbearable to look at. The Ghost King Palace Master, in the end, did not say the last sentence before he died. The top powerhouse of the Senluo Ghost Domain died under the sword of Nietian. Everyone looked over, staring at Nietian. In their eyes, in addition to great shock, there was more fear and panic. Chapter 1783. Nietian killed the Ghost King Palace Master. The corners of his mouth slightly raised, but his face was a little pale. He burned his sword intent and used the forbidden technique, which put a great burden on his martial body. Fortunately, Nietian's martial body was strong enough, which allowed him to use the forbidden technique of the Proud Sword Art under the condition of activating the 3 forbidden techniques. Nietian, what should we do with these little loaches? At this time, Gue Wukong finally reacted. His eyes swept over the surrounding martial artists in black and asked with a sinister smile. Just now, Gue Wukong had already killed many martial artists in black, and only a dozen people were left in front of him. Kill! Nietian's eyes sank. The corners of his mouth cold spat out a word, and then his figure moved. A sword slashed down, directly killing 3 martial artists in black. These people's strength was very good, but in the eyes of Nietian at the moment, it was not enough. Gue Wukong's mouth-cold smile, and then moved. The 8 desolate ghost martial artists waved several swords, and all the martial artists in black were all killed. The Ghost King Palace Master led the elites of the Ghost King Palace to ambush here, waiting for Nietian and the others to appear. But never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that the final result would be like this. Nietian stood in midair, and after confirming that everyone was dead, he breathed a long sigh of relief. Immediately, the aura around his body dissipated, and his strength returned to the middle stage of High God, and the pale color on his face suddenly eased. Nietian, are you okay? Rui Qinyu came forward and asked with concern. Nietian smiled slightly, indicating that he was fine. Although this battle was tragic, it made him very satisfied. He finally killed the Ghost King Palace Master. Nietian, you are indeed stronger than me. Gue Wukong also came over and said in a deep voice. Although there was a smile at the corner of his mouth, there was some bitterness. Gue Wukong was an extremely rare genius swordsman. He had his own pride in swordsmanship and never bowed to others. But in the face of Nietian, he really had to bow his head. The latter was too monstrous. Gue Wukong had seen countless monstrous geniuses before. However, all of them were far from being comparable to Nietian. You're not bad yourself, Gue Wukong, replied Nietian with a faint smile as he patted Gue Wukong's shoulder. Through the recent period of interaction, Nietian was filled with admiration for Gue Wukong's strength. What's more, Gue Wukong had his own arrogance, but he was absolutely not arrogant. It was indeed not easy to achieve this. Right at this moment, Nietian seemed to have sensed something. His eyes slightly narrowed, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. He loudly said, "Big Brother Feng, it seems that you're late." In the air, a familiar voice rang out, after which a white-robed silhouette descended. It was none other than Feng Buyu. "Nietian, are you guys all right?" Feng Buyu looked at Nietian and asked anxiously. I'm fine. Nietian smiled faintly, his face calm. Feng Buyu could smell the scent of blood in the air. He couldn't help asking, where are the people from the Ghost King Palace? Dead. Nietian replied with a smile. Dead? Feng Buyu was stunned. Seeing Nietian's pale face, he immediately understood that the latter had just experienced a great battle. What are you doing here, big brother Feng? Nietian asked with a calm smile. Feng Buyu was shocked. I just went to the Ghost King Palace to investigate and suddenly discovered that many of their experts had disappeared. I'm afraid that they might be lying in ambush here, so I rushed over. Feng Buyu was still in disbelief. Nietian, did you guys really kill those experts from the Ghost King Palace? He knew that those experts from the Ghost King Palace were all over-god experts. How could Nietian and the others kill so many over-god experts? Brother Feng, not only are the experts from the Ghost King Palace dead, even the Ghost King Palace Lord was killed by Nietian, said Gue Wuchan with a mischievous smile as he stepped forward. What did you say? Feng Buyu stared blankly for a moment. He couldn't believe his ears at all. I said that the Ghost King Palace Lord is dead, killed by Nietian, repeated Gue Wuchan. Looking at Feng Buyu's shocked expression, Gue Wuchan couldn't help but laugh. That's impossible. Feng Buyu gulped. His eyes flickered incessantly. He still couldn't believe Gue Wuchan's words. He sensed Nietian's strength and found that he was only a mid-stage high god. He was even more doubtful. With the Ghost King Palace Lord's strength, even Sunluo's 7 knights might not be able to defeat him. How could Nietian kill the Ghost King Palace Lord with a single strike? Brother Feng, I did kill the Ghost King Palace Lord. It was a narrow victory. Nietian explained helplessly. He didn't want to dwell on this matter any longer. Let's go back to Sunluo Temple first. Nietian's figure moved. He pulled Rui Qinyu and flew towards Sunluo Temple. Gue Wuchan immediately followed. Feng Buyu was dumbfounded for a long time before he reacted and followed. After a while, Nietian and the others returned to Sunluo Temple. Nietian didn't waste any time and went straight to Sunluo's 7 knights to see him. Nietian, you're back. Sunluo's 7 knights walked out of the hall and was excited to see Nietian. Lord Temple Lord, Nietian smiled faintly. At this moment, Feng Buyu walked over and told him about how Nietian had killed the sectmaster of the Ghost King Palace. Face filled with shock, Sunluo's 7 knights asked, Nietian, did you really kill the sectmaster of the Ghost King Palace? Yes. Nietian nodded and didn't explain too much to Sunluo's 7 knights. He asked, are Ruoyu and Zhen Su all right? They're fine, Sunluo's 7 knights replied. His eyes were still flickering with disbelief. Nietian killing the Ghost King Palace Master was a huge piece of good news for him. From now on, Sunluo Ghost Domain would only have him, Sunluo's 7 knights, as the king. Sunluo's 7 knights even thought about it. From now on, Sunluo Ghost Region would only have one king. Nietian returned safely from the forbidden land of martialism. Envoys from the forbidden land of martialism would appear and give Sunluo Ghost Region some benefits. However, Nietian didn't care about any of this. Next, they left Sunluo Hall and went to visit Ryu, Zhen Su, and Tawny's family. Ruoyu and Zhen Su had already returned to normal. However, some of their memories were missing and they didn't recognize Nietian. However, they remembered Rui, Qinyu, and Tawny very clearly. Nietian was speechless. He didn't stay for long and left. After a while, Nietian came to a small courtyard and saw Gue Wuxian in the courtyard. He was looking for Gue Wuxian because of Gue Wuxia. Nietian made a decision. Next, he would start looking for Gue Wuxia and save the Sword Elder together with him. Nietian. Gue Wuxian saw Nietian come over and couldn't help but faintly smile. You're here because of teacher, right? Yes. Nietian nodded and said, I'm going to look for Lord Gue Wu. I also want to see teacher. We can go together. Gue Wuxian faintly smiled. He had also been looking for Gue Wuxia, and he already had some clues. Okay, Nietian laughed, then asked, do you know anything about Lord Gue Wu? I know a little. Gue Wuxian nodded. His expression couldn't help but become a lot more serious. He said, "A few years ago, I heard that someone saw a teacher in the realm of darkness." Realm of darkness. Hearing those words, Nyetion's eyes couldn't help but flicker. It was as if he had heard that name somewhere before. Old High. In the next moment, Nyetion suddenly thought of something and cried out in his heart. Chapter 1784. Nyetion suddenly remembered that when Yi Qinghai left the divine realm of the heaven realm, he went to the realm of darkness. Thinking of this, his eyes couldn't help but flicker as he recalled many things. According to Yi Qinghai, Nyetion's father, Nie Fenghua, was most likely imprisoned in the realm of darkness. "Nyetion, are you okay?" Gue Wutsan noticed that Nyetion's reaction was a little strange and couldn't help but ask. "I'm fine." Nyetion shook his head and said, "The realm of darkness doesn't belong to the 9 domains." Among the 9 major realms, Nyetion had already been to 2, the God-shocking realm in the 3 lower realms, and the God-mustering realm in the 3 middle realms. He also knew about the God-forbidding realm and the God-sealing realm in the 3 upper realms. He also knew the names of the other domains, but he had never been there. "Yes." Gue Wutsan nodded and gave an affirmative answer. The realm of darkness does not belong to the 9 domains. It is a space-time outside the 9 domains called the 10th domain. The 10th domain. Nyetion's eyes narrowed slightly. Although the realm of darkness was not on par with the 9 domains, it had the title of the 10th domain, which showed that it was definitely a very vast world. Gue Wutsan's face became much more serious as he said, "The reason why the realm of darkness is called darkness is because there are no rules, and it is full of bloody killings. Let me put it this way. Entering the realm of darkness is equivalent to entering a larger 9-infant forbidden hunting ground." Nyetion's eyes flickered slightly. It seemed that the realm of darkness was an extremely dangerous place, a naked world of killing. Gue Wukan's eyes narrowed as he said, "Although the strong are respected in the 9 domains, most of the martial artists follow certain principles and don't dare to be too arrogant. After all, there are various forces suppressing them. The realm of darkness is different. Once you enter, you will become everyone's prey, and everyone else is also your prey. Anyone can kill you without any reason, and they don't need to take any responsibility. It is rumored that many forces and families will put their genius disciples into the realm of darkness, letting them experience the baptism of blood and killing and become the real strong." At this point, Gue Wukan came to a stop as a faint tremor appeared in his eyes. Nyetion was surprised. He hadn't expected such a place to exist in the realms. After calming down, Nyetion asked, "Are there any major forces in the realm of darkness?" He did not believe that a place could fall into complete chaos. He felt that there must be a mastermind behind the scenes controlling the realm of darkness. "Yes." Gue Wuchan's eyes slightly narrowed as he said, "It's rumored that the ruler behind the domain of darkness is an organization called Black Lotus. It was this organization that controlled everything in the darkness realm. However, no one has ever seen this organization. It seems like everyone who has seen the Black Lotus is dead. So strange." Nyetion frowned slightly, and his eyes flashed with unconcealable anticipation. At this time, Gue Wuchan suddenly thought of something. His eyes sank as he said, "Nyetion, it said that the realm of darkness is filled with blood and fiendish qi. Those who enter and absorb the fiendish qi will slowly become crazy and finally become a bloodthirsty demon." Nyetion slightly nodded and said, "Regarding everything about the realm of darkness, we must personally enter it to know the real answer. You really plan to enter the realm of darkness?" Gue Wuchan couldn't help being stunned when he saw the firm look in Nyetion's eyes. "Of course." Nyetion heavily nodded and asked, "Don't you want to enter the realm of darkness?" "Good, let's go together." Gue Wuchan laughed, and his eyes slowly became firm. In fact, he had wanted to enter the realm of darkness a few years ago, but he was too weak at that time. Now that his strength had increased by a lot, and with a monstrous companion like Nyetion by his side, he naturally wouldn't decline. 3 days later, outside the Dark Azura Hall. Nye Tian, do you really want to go to the realm of darkness? Sun Luo's 7 knights looked at Nye Tian and the others, and asked with a heavy expression. Yes. Nye Tian nodded, and his expression was firm. Sun Luo's 7 knights still wanted to say something, but when he felt Nye Tian's determination, he knew that it was useless no matter what he said, and could only give up. Nye Tian no longer hesitated, and his eyes swept over Rui Qinyu and Gue Wuchan as he indifferently said, Let's go. Originally, Nye Tian wanted to let Rui Qinyu stay here, but the latter insisted on going to the realm of darkness with him. Fat Cat also let Nye Tian bring Rui Qinyu along, thinking that Rui Qinyu's rainbow pupils might play a role at a critical moment. Gue Wuchan said something to Feng Biyu and arranged for the latter to wait in the dark Azura Hall if Lan Yiru came, and he would definitely come back. Rain, Junsu, and Tawny continued to stay in the dark Azura Hall. Their wish was very simple, and that was to live a peaceful life together as a family. Nye Tian, Rui Qinyu, and Gue Wuchan did not stay any longer and prepared to leave immediately. Gue Wuchan took a step forward and opened the realm divine boat. In order to enter the realm of darkness, they must first enter the upper realm's god investiture region. Nye Tian and the others were now in the lower realm's god investiture region, and it would be very troublesome to enter the god investiture region. But he did not expect that Gue Wuchan would have a realm divine boat. What surprised him even more was that Gue Wuchan's realm divine boat was not a one-time use, but a permanent one. Nye Tian had heard from a heartbroken breaker young master that there were only a few hundred one-time used realm divine boats in the 9 major realms, and only a few dozen permanent ones. Who would have thought that the unassuming Gue Wuchan would have a permanent realm divine boat in his possession? Nye Tian and Rui Qinyu exchanged a look and then stepped into the realm divine boat together. Gue Wuchan followed them. Seeing the realm divine boat disappear into the void, Sun Luo's 7 knights' eyes trembled slightly, and he seemed to be thinking about something. Little 7, do you think that Nye Tian and the others can come out of the realm of darkness alive? Feng Biyu frowned and suddenly asked. Definitely. The corner of Sun Luo's 7 knights' mouth twitched strangely, and he gave an unusually certain answer. Feng Biyu was stunned for a moment, and then he smiled and said, Little 7, I have never seen you so confident in a person. Nye Tian and the others entered the realm of darkness, and it is a godforsaken place that can only be entered, but not exited. Sun Luo's 7 knights also smiled, and then he asked, Before Nye Tian, have you seen anyone with the strength of an upper deity kill a supreme god martial artist with a single sword strike? No. Feng Buyu's face froze, and he was speechless by Sun Luo's 7 knights' question. After a long time, he shook his head with a dull expression. I have not seen it either. Sun Luo's 7 knights smiled again, and then his eyes became serious, and he said in a deep voice, So I firmly believe that Nye Tian will come out of the realm of darkness. Chapter 1785. Investiture of God's Region. One of the 3 main cities, Sky Edge City. On the street, people came and went, and it was very lively. At this moment, 3 figures were walking on the wide street. They were not in a hurry at all, strolling leisurely. The 3 figures were none other than Nye Tian, Rui Qinyu, and Gue Wuchan. They had just arrived at Sky Edge City and were planning to stay for a few days. Sky Edge City is the only way to enter the darkness region. There's a place called Death's Ferry. Everyone who enters the darkness region enters from there, Gue Wuchan said as he walked. Gue Wuchan was born in the investiture of God's region, so he was very familiar with it. However, this was his first time coming to Sky Edge City. He felt that it was more prosperous than he had imagined. Sky Edge City was one of the 3 main cities of the investiture of God's region, after all. It was normal for it to be prosperous. It would be abnormal if the streets were empty. Do you know where Death's Ferry is? Nye Tian asked. I don't know. Gue Wuchan chuckled and said, We can find a bigger restaurant first. It should be easy to find out. Death's Ferry was not a secret. It was just the entrance to the darkness region. Basically, there would be a large number of people entering Death's Ferry every day. Most of these people were desperados. They were fierce and bloodthirsty. They felt that the outside world was boring and entered the darkness region to find excitement. Nietion nodded slightly and continued walking forward. He was going to find a bigger restaurant to find out more information. At this moment, a sharp strand of sword chi suddenly whistled through the sky, leaving behind a dazzling ray of light in the sky. The crowd was attracted by the sword light and raised their heads. A white-clothed figure appeared in the sky. Endless sword intent surged around him. He took a step forward and stood high up in the sky. Almost at the same time, a green-clothed figure appeared on the other side of the sky. He also released a violent aura and stood in the sky like a mountain. Nietion suddenly raised his head. He could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw the two people in the sky. The two people did not seem very old. They should be martial artists around 10,000 years old. However, their strength was extremely terrifying. They had both reached the peak of Overgod. Around 10,000 years old was a very young age for a God Realm martial artist. Looking at the posture of the two, it seemed that they were about to start a battle in the air. At this moment, Gue Wukong raised his head to look at the two. His eyes narrowed as he exclaimed in astonishment, "It's the two of them. You know them?" Nietion gawked for a moment before shooting a look at Gue Wukong. Gue Wukong nodded solemnly before laughing. Both of them are on the Overgod ranking. The white-clothed swordsman is Jian Jingyun of the Jian family, while the other is Zhou Qing of the Zhou family. Someone on the Overgod's ranking? Nietion was stunned once again. He was slightly surprised. He had heard of the 9-region Overgod leaderboard. It was a ranking of all the Overgod experts in the 9 major realms. Basically, those who could make it into the top 100 were no weaker than ordinary Overgod martial artists. Nietion's 6th uncle, Niefeiyu, ranked first on the 9 regions Overgod leaderboard and was known as the strongest Overgod. Nietion had personally witnessed Niefeiyu's strength. The latter's true strength was definitely above that of experts like the Ghost King Palace Master. Niefeiyu had once defeated Jiang Yulong, who was ranked 5th on the Overgod leaderboard, with a single palm strike. Gue Wukong, what's the ranking of these two guys on the Overgod leaderboard? Nietion could not help but smile as he asked curiously. Both of them are ranked in the top 10 on the Overgod leaderboard. Jian Jingyun is ranked 9th, while Zhou Qing is ranked 10th, Gue Wukong said with a playful expression as he crossed his arms. You're also on the Overgod leaderboard, right? How's your strength compared to theirs? Nietion asked with a laugh. My ranking on the Overgod leaderboard is not worth mentioning. Gue Wukong's eyes flickered as he said, I was indeed not their opponent before, but I might not be able to do so now. Nietion nodded slightly. Gue Wukong's strength had indeed increased greatly compared to a few months ago. Jian Jingyun, this is my 3rd time challenging you. After this battle, our rankings will be announced. At this moment, Zhou Qing spoke. His voice was deep, and his battle intent was very strong. Ridiculous. Jian Jingyun raised his eyebrows slightly. His face was filled with disdain. Afterwards, he raised a finger and said, Zhou Qing, I only need 1 strike to defeat you. How arrogant. Zhou Qing roared furiously. His aura surged, and immediately yellow sand appeared in the air. It covered the sky and condensed into a yellow sand giant in the air. It was 5,000 or 6,000 meters tall. Standing in the sky, it was like a mountain. What a powerful aura. The crowd cried out with trembling eyes. Even the ground was swept up by a terrifying gust of wind. A cultivator with dual attributes of earth and wind. Not bad. Nietion looked at Zhou Qing and commented with a faint smile. Zhou Qing possessed dual attributes of earth and wind. No wonder he could make it into the top 10 of the Overgod leaderboard. Jian Jingyun died. In the next moment, Zhou Qing roared furiously. The yellow sand giant took a step forward, and the entire sky began to tremble. The space seemed like it was about to collapse. Jian Jingyun stood in the air. Sword aura surged around him, making him seem like a sharp sword. Boom! The yellow sand giant threw a punch. The huge fist smashed towards Jian Jingyun like a collapsing mountain. Jian Jingyun did not panic at all. His eyes flickered slightly, and he stabbed out with his sword. A surging sword shadow rushed into the sky, and dazzling light blossomed from his sword. A sharp sword intent rushed out, and it was silent and solemn. Boom! Afterwards, the fist and the sword collided, and there was a loud sound in the air. The yellow sand giant's body trembled, and then it collapsed. Seeing the scene in the sky, everyone gasped. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Jian Jingyun was right. He had really defeated Zhou Qing with a single strike. In the air, Zhou Qing's figure flew backwards, and he only managed to stabilize himself after flying for several hundred meters. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was as pale as paper. Jian Jingyun, Zhou Qing wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and he stared at Jian Jingyun in shock, but he could not say anything. Zhou Qing, you're too weak. If you want to defeat me, you'll have to train for another 10,000 years. Jian Jingyun sheathed his sword and said coldly. His ice voice resounded in the air, and it was extremely ear-piercing. Pooh! Hearing Jian Jingyun's words, Zhou Qing immediately felt his blood boil. His body trembled, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Tian could not help but twitch his mouth. He murmured, "Victory and defeat are common." Spitting out blood because of a single insult from the opponent, this kind of person is destined to not go far. His voice was not loud, but the surrounding crowd was deathly silent, so it was very clear. Hearing Tian's words, Zhou Qing suddenly turned around, and his gaze locked onto Tian's body. An intense killing intent could be seen in his eyes. He had just been defeated by Jian Jingyun, and there was a ball of fire in his stomach. Suddenly, someone came out of nowhere to teach him a lesson. How could he tolerate this? Chapter 1786. Dai Yuan. Zhou Qing's figure swooped down from the sky and struck out with his palm. A stream of yellow sand roared like a tornado and pressed down on Tian. The surrounding crowd was stunned for a moment and immediately retreated. Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at Zhou Qing. His eyes narrowed slightly. Sword intent gushed out from his body, and a powerful sword aura soared into the sky. A sword silhouette rose into the sky like a dragon breaking out of the abyss. Boom! Two terrifying forces collided in midair. Immediately, a violent explosion was heard. Violent airwaves rolled in all directions. Yellow sand filled the air and dust covered the sky. After a long while, the sand in the air dispersed. Zhou Qing's figure appeared. His face was gloomy as he stared at Tian. There was anger in his eyes, but more than that, there was shock. He did not expect that an early-stage mid-god would be able to withstand his palm strike. Tian stood motionless on the same spot. He also stared at Zhou Qing with burning eyes. Zhou Qing was very powerful. His palm strike just now was very powerful. It forced Tian to use the tri-evil sword vein. Zhou Qing had suffered some injuries in his battle with Jian Jingyun. In addition, he had underestimated Tian. Therefore, he did not use his full strength in that palm strike. Therefore, Tian was able to receive it with ease. If Zhou Qing had used his full strength, Tian would not have been able to receive it so easily. Challenging a peak over-god expert with the strength of a mid-stage high god. This silver-haired kid is interesting. High up in the sky, Jian Jingyun was about to leave. He did not expect that Tian would be able to receive Zhou Qing's palm strike. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Jian Jingyun had also heard what Tian had said. Although Tian was telling the truth, he would undoubtedly be treated as an idiot if he said such words with his strength. Given Tian's strength, offending Zhou Qing at this moment was no different from courting death. At this time, the crowd stared intently at Tian and Zhou Qing, anticipating what would happen next. Unexpectedly, Zhou Qing was much calmer. He stared at Tian and asked in a cold voice, "Stinking brat, who are you?" "I'm just a spectator," Tian replied calmly. He did not want to waste any more time with Zhou Qing. So, he decided to let the matter end here. As Tian spoke, He turned around and prepared to leave. You want to leave? However, Zhou Qing clearly had no intention of letting him leave. He sneered and said, "You're just an ant. You want to leave after provoking me? How could it be that easy? What do you want?" Yet Tian frowned slightly, and a trace of dissatisfaction flashed in his eyes. He had indeed spoken out of turn, but Zhou Qing had already made his move, so the two of them were even. So, it was best for both of them to end the matter like this. However, Zhou Qing refused to let go. This made Niet Tian a little unhappy. "You have to pay the price for offending me." Zhou Qing's eyes were filled with killing intent. A malicious voice rolled out from his throat as he said, "And the price is death." As the word death was uttered, Zhou Qing's figure lowered slightly. His wild aura rolled out, and the space around him tightened in an instant. Although Niet Tian had just received a palm strike from him, Zhou Qing still did not take him seriously. A mere superior god was no different from an ant in his eyes. "You want to kill me?" Niet Tian's expression changed slightly. He did not expect Zhou Qing to be so unreasonable. He wanted to kill him just because of one sentence. "Yes," Zhou Qing said in a deep voice. His voice was like a clap of thunder that exploded in the air. "Zhou Qing, you are narrow-minded. After being defeated by Jian Jingyun, you have nowhere to vent your anger. That's your own business. However, if you want to vent your anger on me, I can only say that you have found the wrong person." Niet Tian suddenly raised his head. A wave of sword aura surged out and directly broke through Zhou Qing's aura. Zhou Qing was currently in a fit of anger, so he simply wanted to find someone to vent his anger on. Unfortunately, he found the wrong person. Niet Tian wasn't a pushover that could be easily bullied. "Zhou Qing, I advise you to stop now. If you continue to attack, you will definitely regret it." As soon as Niet Tian finished speaking, Gue Wuxian stepped forward and kindly reminded him. Gue Wuxian had seen Niet Tian kill a superior god with a single sword strike. Although Zhou Qing was on the overgod list, his battle prowess was definitely below that of the Ghost King Palace Master. If Zhou Qing still wanted to attack Niet Tian, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Zhou Qing frowned and looked at Gue Wuxian. He immediately sensed something. Then, the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking smile. He said coldly, "The people of the Gue Wuxian family are getting worse and worse. They're actually walking together with a superior god trash. Your words just now are a disgrace to the name of the Gue Wuxian family." Gue Wuxian was very familiar with Jian Jingyun and Zhou Qing, but the two of them did not know him. Gue Wuxian was also much younger than the two of them. The Gue Wuxian family was one of the 9 great families. They had an extremely high status in the 9 great domains. Although Zhou Qing did not know Gue Wuxian, he could sense his aura and guess his identity. Although Gue Wuxian was speaking the truth, in Zhou Qing's ears, it sounded very weak. Zhou Qing felt that Gue Wuxian, as a member of the Gue Wuxian family, was simply discrediting the name of the Gue Wuxian family by praising a superior god. Gue Wuxian's eyes sank slightly as he said coldly, "A mad dog that bites whoever it catches. You brat, you're courting death." Zhou Qing was furious when he was scolded. He shouted, "Do you think I can't kill you just because you're a member of the Gue Wuxian family? Don't forget, my Zhou family is also one of the 9 great families." Gue Wuxian sneered. He wanted to say something, but was stopped by Niet Tian's hand. The corner of Niet Tian's mouth curled into a cold smile. He took a step forward, and his figure soared into the sky. He confronted Zhou Qing and said in a deep voice, "Make your move." Zhou Qing stared blankly for a moment. Then, he laughed wildly and said loudly, "A superior god trash wants to fight me? You're courting death." The onlookers on the ground were also stunned. They did not expect that Niet Tian would actually dare to accept the challenge. If it was Gue Wuxian who went up to fight Zhou Qing, it might have been possible. However, Niet Tian was simply courting death. Everyone believed that the reason why Niet Tian was able to receive Zhou Qing's palm was because Zhou Qing did not use his full strength. If Zhou Qing had used his full strength, Niet Tian would definitely have died on the spot. Everyone knew that Zhou Qing did not use his full strength. However, they did not know that Nie Tian did not use his full strength either. This battle is going to be interesting. Jian Jingyun stared at Nie Tian from the sky. He did not expect Nie Tian to accept the challenge. Of course, he could tell that Nie Tian was not an idiot who would be angered by a few words. Therefore, Nie Tian definitely had something up his sleeves if he dared to accept the challenge. However, Jian Jingyun could not understand what trump card Nie Tian had that was so powerful that he dared to fight a peak over God. You brat, if you're still alive after this attack, I won't be surnamed Zhou. Zhou Qing's aura surged, and a strong gust of wind blew in the air. Yellow sand flew everywhere, filling the space for tens of thousands of meters. The yellow sand giant that was 5,000 to 6,000 meters tall appeared once again, and its wild aura covered the sky and earth. Chapter 1787. Nie Tian hovered in midair. His sword was swirling around him, making him look like a sharp sword that seemed capable of ripping apart anything in its path. What a sharp sword will, Jian Jingyun murmured, his eyes trembling as he sensed Nie Tian's sword will. As a swordsman who had reached the level of selflessness, it was only natural that he could see how terrifying Nie Tian's sword will was. Although his cultivation base was one level higher than Nie Tian's, he had a feeling that his sword will wasn't as strong as Nie Tian's. How could a swordsman who had reached the level of selflessness not be as strong as a swordsman who had reached the quintessence of the sword? Jian Jingyun was extremely talented in the Tao of the sword. He was only 12,000 years old, but his cultivation base had already reached the level of selflessness. He was very confident that before he reached the peak of the paramount god level, he would be able to reach the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. Jian Jingyun had to admit that among all the sword cultivators in the 9 major realms, his sword will wasn't the strongest, but it was definitely in the top 10. But now there was a swordsman who had reached the quintessence of the sword, and whose sword was even stronger than his. Of all the swordsmen Jian Jingyun had met, Nie Tian's sword wasn't the strongest, but it was definitely the most terrifying. That was because Nie Tian was only at the quintessence of the sword level, and yet his sword was already so terrifying. If he reached the level of martial arts and sword as one, his sword would be even more terrifying. There's something strange about this kid. Jian Jingyun was so shocked that his expression flickered. However, he was still very confused. Although Nie Tian's sword was terrifying, it was impossible for him to defeat Zhou Qing with only the power of the sword. Jian Jingyun had been able to defeat Zhou Qing not only because of his cultivation base, but also because he was a peak over God. Although Nie Tian's sword was strong, he was still too weak. He couldn't possibly be a match for Zhou Qing. Swordsman, I hate people who use swords the most. At that moment, Zhou Qing sensed Nie Tian's sword will, which made him even more furious. Letting out a roar, he sprang into action. Instantly, the sand giant in the air began to charge forward, causing heaven and earth to shake. Die! Zhou Qing roared, and the yellow sand giant slammed down with its palm. Its terrifying aura seemed to be able to shatter the heavens and rend the earth. Endless amounts of sand pressed down on Nie Tian. It was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian stood tall in the air. His eyes suddenly flickered. What he revealed was not fear, but an intense desire to fight. In an instant, strange talisman markings surged around his body. His strength rose explosively, and his aura surged like the sea. I'll defeat you with one sword. The moment his aura skyrocketed to the extreme, Nie Tian let out a low roar and stabbed out with his sword. Suddenly, the sword intent condensed and a stream of sword light whizzed out. It was like a giant dragon, rolling in the air. Boom! In the next moment, the sword shadow bombarded the yellow sand giant. With a loud boom, the yellow sand giant was directly shattered. The terrifying sword light shot out, and the sword circulated in the endless space. The crowd was dumbfounded, and their faces were stiff. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Following that, A cry of agony was heard as Zhou Qing's figure was sent flying, leaving a trail of blood in the air. The entire place was deathly silent. Everyone stared blankly at the scene in the air. They were unable to make a sound for a very long time. Zhou Qing had lost. He had been defeated by a high god. A peak overgod, the 10th expert on the overgod ranking, had actually lost to a high god. This was just too unbelievable. This outcome had exceeded everyone's expectations. Nie Tian stood in the air. The talisman markings around him dispersed, and his strength returned to mid-high god. On the other side, Zhou Qing stabilized his body. He was covered in blood, and he was in an extremely sorry state. This is impossible. This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Zhou Qing yelled out crazily. He seemed to have lost his mind. He was unable to accept everything before him. He could not accept the fact that Nie Tian had defeated him. How could he have imagined that an ant that he did not even want to look at would actually defeat him? Moreover, it was so easy with just a casual swing of the sword. He could lose to Jian Jingyan because the latter was an influential figure in the overgod ranking. However, he could not lose to Nie Tian because the latter was nothing. Nie Tian looked at Zhou Qing, who had almost lost his mind, and could not help but shake his head. He thought to himself, it's a miracle that such a weak heart of martial arts could make it this far. Nie Tian had not used his full strength in the previous attack. Otherwise, Zhou Qing would have been a corpse long ago. Zhou Qing was a member of the 9 great clans. Nie Tian did not want to kill him to avoid unnecessary trouble. Nie Tian glanced at Zhou Qing and shook his head with a smile. Then, he turned around and prepared to leave. Wait! However, at this moment, a figure suddenly landed. He stared at Nie Tian and said in a cold voice, "You're not allowed to leave." Huh? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, he turned around and looked at the person who had spoken. It was Jian Jingyan. Jian Jingyan had also been shocked by Nie Tian's attack just now. He could not react for a long time. He had never thought that Nie Tian's trump card would be so powerful. It had completely exceeded his expectations. He could see that Nie Tian had not used his full strength in the previous attack. However, even under such circumstances, Nie Tian had defeated Zhou Qing with a single attack. It seemed like it was easier than Jian Jingyan. Jian Jingyan, Gue Wuchan, who was watching from below, could not help but cry out in surprise. Jian Jingyan had spoken at this moment. What do you want? Nie Tian's reaction was very calm. He smiled and asked Jian Jingyan, I want to fight with you. Jian Jingyan's eyes flashed, and he said in a deep voice. When the crowd heard his words, they immediately burst into an uproar. Then, their eyes became blazing. They were looking forward to the battle between Nie Tian and Jian Jingyan. Jian Jingyan and Nie Tian had both defeated Zhou Qing not long ago. Moreover, they had defeated their opponents with a single attack. The battle between these two people would definitely be very exciting. There is no grudge between us. We are merely strangers who have never met before. Why should I fight with you? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled into a smile as he said in an indifferent tone. Jian Jingyan was dumbfounded. He did not expect that Nie Tian would actually reply in such a manner. His thinking was very simple. Was there a need for a reason for a battle between two swordsmen? Nie Tian smiled again and said, You are very interested in my sword intent, right? How about this? I can fight with you. However, there is a precondition. We will only compete in sword intent, not strength. Jian Jingyan was slightly stunned. Then, a blazing light flashed in his eyes. He nodded heavily and said, Fine. He wanted to see how strong Nie Tian's sword intent was, but he did not want to offend Nie Tian or cause Nie Tian to misunderstand him. Nie Tian's suggestion was very good. Only competing in sword intent, not strength. This was exactly what Jian Jingyan wanted. The so-called competing in sword intent meant that both sides would only use the sword intent within their bodies. They would not use their true meridians or godheads. It would be purely a battle of sword intent. Nie Tian knew that Jian Jingyan was very strong. He guessed that Jian Jingyan might have some relationship with the Sword Elder. Hence, he chose this safer method. Both sides would not fight too fiercely. Jian Jingyan, are you ready? Nie Tian took a deep breath and said in an indifferent tone, "We will only compete with one sword. One sword to determine the winner." Jian Jingyun nodded heavily. He seemed very excited. Chapter 1788. Boom, boom. In the air, two figures stood upright. Two sword auras shot up into the sky, making the two figures look like two sharp swords. It was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian looked at Jian Jingyun, and the corner of his mouth curled up. In the next moment, the sword essence around him surged and condensed into a sword shadow in the air. In an instant, it whizzed out. Almost at the same time, Jian Jingyun also thrust out his sword. The sword shadow was like a roaring dragon. Seeing the two sword shadows appear in the air, the crowd's eyes widened. Their faces tightened, and their hearts jumped to their throats. Clang! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with each other. It was as if gold and stone had collided. A crisp sound of impact was heard and echoed in the air. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly. Then, he stepped back and retracted his sword essence. Jian Jingyun also stepped back and retracted his sword essence. In the air, the two figures stood upright. After a long time, they looked at each other and smiled. The crowd was dumbfounded. They had no idea what was going on. Nie Tian and Jian Jingyun had yet to determine the winner. Why did he suddenly retract his sword essence? Everyone was baffled. They didn't know who won the battle of sword wills this time. From the surface, it seemed that the two of them were evenly matched. Nie Tian is so strong. Gue Wuchan was stunned for a long time. His eyes were filled with shock. After a long time, he finally reacted and exclaimed in his heart. Others might not be able to see it, but Gue Wuchan could. In this clash of sword essences, Nie Tian had won. However, Nie Tian did not want to embarrass Jian Jingyun. Therefore, he immediately retracted his sword essence. Nie Tian's sword essence was indeed stronger than Jian Jingyun's. Although his sword realm was lower than Jian Jingyun's, he had 5 sword essences at the same time: Proud Sword Essence, Star Sword Essence, Thunderbolt Sword Essence, Soul Devourer Sword Essence, and 3 Evil Sword Essence. Just now, Nie Tian had only used 3 of the 5 sword essences. He did not use the Soul Devourer Sword Essence or the 3 Evil Sword Essence. Even so, his sword intent was still stronger than Jian Jingyun's. Jian Jingyun was a genius in the way of the sword. How could he not sense this? Therefore, when Nie Tian sheathed his sword, he also chose to sheath his sword. Gue Wukan had precisely sensed that Nie Tian's sword intent was lacking a lot of its aura. Therefore, he knew that Nie Tian had yet to use his full strength. Jian Jingyun were tied in this battle of sword intents. Nie Tian looked at Jian Jingyun and smiled faintly. Jian Jingyun did not take the opportunity to attack when Nie Tian sheathed his sword. This showed that he was a straightforward person. Nie Tian had heard Jian Jingyun's sword cry and concluded that the latter was a righteous swordsman. That was why he sheathed his sword. Jian Jingyun slightly shook his head, smiled, and said in a clear voice, "I have lost this battle of sword intent. Your sword intent is much stronger than mine." His indifferent voice caused a huge uproar in the crowd. The genius swordsman of the Jian family, ranked 9th on the overgod list, had admitted defeat to a superior god in front of so many people. This was beyond everyone's expectations. Jian Jingyun's magnanimity could be seen from his actions. Jian Jingyun's words and actions were in stark contrast to Zhou Qing's earlier actions. Jian Jingyun had used his actions to tell everyone that he, Jian Jingyun, could win, but he could also afford to lose. Nie Tian nodded his head slightly. This was how a person with a strong heart of martial arts should behave. Only such a person could go far on the path of martial arts. Your sword intent is so strong that I have never seen anything like it in my life. May I know your name? Jian Jingyun looked at Nie Tian and asked with his hands clasped. My name is Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Brother Nie, we feel like old friends at first sight. Can we be friends? Jian Jingyun did not put on any pretense and asked directly. Brother Jian, you are too polite. We are already friends. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He was very happy to be friends with such a righteous swordsman. Gue Wuchan, who was watching from below, was stunned. He thought to himself, are these two regretting not meeting each other earlier? At this moment, Nie Tian and Jian Jingyan landed. Nie Tian introduced Rui Qianyu and Gue Wuchan to Jian Jingyan. Then, the four of them went to the largest restaurant in Tianya City and asked for a private room. Brother Nie, your sword intent is really too powerful. I really admire you. Among all the genius swordsmen I've met, your talent is definitely second to none. In the private room, Jian Jingyan was extremely excited. He couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. Before he met Nie Tian, he had never thought that a swordsman with the essence of the sword could be so strong. Jian Jingyan, you don't have to be so polite. Just call him Nie Tian. Calling him brother Nie every day will make you feel like an outsider, Gue Wuchan said with a mischievous smile. He picked up a wine jar and drank from it. And Nie Tian nodded slightly and said, Jian Jingyan, we will call each other by name in the future. And good. Jian Jingyan repeatedly agreed. He also picked up a jar of wine and said to Nie Tian, Nie Tian, I toast you. Nie Tian, of course, did not decline. He picked up a jar of wine and drank from it. In his previous life, Nie Tian often drank with Mo, Qianjun, and Jiu Qiansheng. He had not experienced this feeling for a long time. Nie Tian, you're not from Tianya City, right? Jian Jingyan suddenly asked. No. Nie Tian shook his head and said with a smile, we came to Tianya City for some business. Don't tell me you want to enter the realm of darkness? Jian Jingyan was stunned. Nie Tian was also stunned. He nodded and said with a smile, we are going to the realm of darkness. Jian Jingyan's eyes trembled. He was stunned. He then said in a serious tone, Nie Tian, the realm of darkness is a place of slaughter. Why are you going there? I'm looking for someone, Nie Tian said in a deep voice. Who are you looking for? Jian Jingyan asked. To find my teacher. Gue Wuchan raised his head and interrupted. We're going to find Lord Gue Wu Kwangsha. Nie Tian nodded and added. Southern Gue Wu. Jian Jingyan was stunned. He cried out in surprise. He looked at Gue Wuchan in astonishment and said, you are Lord Gue Wu's disciple. Don't I look like it? Gue Wuchan was also stunned. Although the name of Southern Gue Wu was famous, Jian Jingyan's reaction was a little too much. Jian Jingyan's eyes flickered. He realized that he had lost his composure. He calmed down, but his expression was still trembling. He suddenly looked at Gue Wuchan and said, Gue Wuchan, there is a relationship between us. Relationship? Gue Wuchan was stunned. He did not know why Jian Jingyan would say such a thing. Although he knew about Jian Jingyan, it was only today that the two of them got to know each other. Gue Wuchan, do you know that Lord Gue Wu Kwangsha has a good friend? Who is he? Jian Jingyan looked at Gue Wuchan with a burning gaze. His voice was trembling. Of course I know. Gue Wuchan's eyes narrowed. He said, Southern Gue Wu Bei Qing Chi teacher only has one good friend, and that is Lord Jian Qing Chi. Southern Gue Wu Bei Qing Chi, these two names were referring to Gue Wu Kwangsha and Jian Qing Chi. And Jian Qing Chi was the sword elder. Jian Jingyan, could it be that you and Lord Jian Qing Chi? At this time, Gue Wuchan suddenly realized something. He let out a strange cry. Chapter 1789. Hearing Jian Jingyan's words, Nie Tian and Gue Wuchan's expressions froze on the spot. They never thought that Jian Jingyan would be Jian Qingqi's grandson. Especially Nie Tian, he was both surprised and pleasantly surprised. Being able to meet a relative of the Sword Elder gave him an indescribable sense of familiarity. When the Sword Elder was by his side, he helped him a lot. Without the Sword Elder, he might not have been able to reach where he is today. Jian Jingyan, you are the grandson of Lord Jian Qingqi? After a moment, Gue Wuchan reacted and couldn't help but cry out in joy. Yes. Jian Jingyan nodded his head once again, but his expression immediately became serious and said, Grandfather is the Jian family's legend and pride. However, he suddenly disappeared a long time ago. Although the Jian family has been searching for him, there was no news of him. After saying that, Jian Jingyan frowned and his expression became even more serious. Jian Jingyun, I have something to tell you next. After you hear it, don't get too excited. Nie Tian became cold and looked at Jian Jingyun with a burning gaze. Jian Jingyun was stunned for a moment. He didn't know what Nie Tian wanted to say, but he still nodded his head. Nie Tian slightly nodded his head and took a deep breath. He didn't hide anything and told Jian Jingyun about how he met the Sword Elder. At the same time, he also told him about the grudges between the Sword Elder and Jiang Lai. Finally, he said, before the Sword Elder left, he told me to come to the Sealed God Domain to find Lord Gui Wu Sha. After that, I met Gui Wuxian and decided to go to the Domain of Darkness to find Lord Gui Wu. After hearing Nie Tian's words, Jian Jingyun's blood started to flow in reverse. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his entire body slightly trembled. It was obvious that he was extremely angry. Jian Jingyun, are you all right? Gui Wuxian couldn't help but ask worriedly after seeing Jian Jingyun's reaction. Nie Tian signaled Gui Wuxian not to speak and to give Jian Jingyun some time to recover. After a moment, Jian Jingyun finally calmed down. However, the killing intent in his eyes was very obvious. He growled, Xingtian Alliance, Master Jiang Lai, I didn't expect that it was you who imprisoned my grandfather. When Jian Jingyun found out that the person who imprisoned Jian Qingqi was Jiang Lai, he could not accept it at all. He even thought that he had heard wrongly. The Jian family and the Jiang family were both part of the 9 great families of the Genesis era. Everyone in the 9 realms knew that among the 9 great families, the Jiang family and the Jian family had a very good relationship. The 2 families were very close and were basically regarded as one family. But under such circumstances, Jiang Lai had actually attacked Jian Qingqi. How could Jian Jingyun not be enraged when he found out about this? Old dog Jiang Lai, I, Jian Jingyun, swear that I will kill you with my own hands. Jian Jingyun's eyes flickered violently, and he roared in his heart. He wished that he could skin Jiang Lai alive. Nie Tian looked at Jian Jingyun. He could understand the anger in Jian Jingyun's heart. Jian Jingyun, before Sword Elder left, he asked me to look for Lord Ghost Marshal Wild Sand. He must have his reasons. After waiting for Jian Jingyun to calm down, Nie Tian said, we can't make this matter public right now. Everything will have to wait until we find Lord Ghost Marshal Wild Sand before making a decision. Jian Jingyun's complexion slightly recovered. After thinking for a long time, he finally nodded. Although the Jian family was also one of the 9 great families, compared to the Xingtian Alliance's Jiang family, the difference in strength was too big. If the Jian family fell out with the Jiang family because of Jian Qingqi and the 2 families started a war, the final result would definitely be the Jian family's destruction. Jian Qingqi knew this, so he didn't ask Nie Tian to look for the Jian family directly. Instead, he asked him to look for Ghost Marshal Wild Sand. Nie Tian, Gui Wuxian, I want to go with you to the Darkness Realm. Jian Jingyun suddenly looked at Nie Tian and said with a gloomy expression, you also want to go to the Darkness Realm? Gui Wuxian was stunned at first. Then he laughed and said, that's great. Nie Tian frowned. He didn't expect Jian Jingyun to make such a decision. Jian Jingyun looked at Nie Tian's hesitation and said, you are looking for Lord Southern Gui Wuxian to save grandfather. As his grandson, I naturally have to do my part. Nie Tian's gaze slightly narrowed. He could feel Jian Jingyun's determination. He could only say, Jian Jingyun, since you have already decided, I won't try to persuade you anymore. Let's go to the Darkness Realm together. Yes. Jian Jingyun heavily nodded. His expression was firm. Jian Jingyun's strength was very strong. It was not bad to have another helper. Jian Jingyun, do you know where the Death Fairy is? The 3 of them calmed down and sat down. Gui Wuxian looked at Jian Jingyun and asked, I know. Jian Jingyun solemnly nodded. Then he suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, today is the opening day of the Death Fairy. Let's hurry over. Maybe we can make it in time. After saying that, Jian Jingyun and Yunting stood up and rushed out of the box. Nie Tian and Gui Wuxian looked at each other. They didn't know what happened and quickly followed. Nie Tian and the rest walked out of the restaurant. Seeing Jian Jingyun's silhouette in the air, they quickly chased after him. Jian Jingyun, what exactly happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Gue Wuchan quickly followed and asked. Nie Tian brought Rui Qinyu with him. Although he was slightly slower, he still managed to catch up. The Death Fairy opens once every 3 months. Today is the official opening day. If we miss today, we'll have to wait for another 3 months. Jian Jingyun anxiously said as he increased his speed. Nie Tian was stunned. So that's what happened. No wonder Jian Jingyun was so anxious. Nie Tian no longer hesitated. He directly activated his Star Soul Wings. Sweeping Rui Qinyu and Gue Wuchan up, he increased his speed and followed closely behind Jian Jingyun. The Death Fairy was located at the edge of the Sky's Edge City. The entire Sky's Edge City had a circumference of 1,000 miles. Nie Tian and the rest took half an hour to arrive. That's the Death Fairy, Jian Jingyun excitedly said as he pointed to a small city in the distance. Nie Tian looked at the small city. He didn't feel anything unusual about it. He didn't know why this place was called the Death Fairy. Very quickly, Nie Tian and the rest descended and entered the city. After entering the city, Nie Tian immediately discovered that the flow of people here was much more crowded than the city center. Looking around, the entire street was filled with people. The Death Gate is about to close. Let's hurry over. At this moment, Jian Jingyun exclaimed and immediately rushed forward. Nie Tian raised his head and saw that at the end of the street, there was a 10-meter-tall black gate that was slowly closing. Everyone was rushing towards the black gate. Obviously, that black gate was the Death Gate that Jian Jingyun had mentioned. Those who wanted to enter the realm of darkness had to first enter the Death Gate. Seeing that the Death Gate was about to close, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel anxious. Nie Tian, there's a killing formation in the space above your head. Wait for a moment. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out, telling Nie Tian not to act rashly. Everyone here didn't dare to fly over directly because of the existence of the killing formation. Once the killing formation was activated, even a paramount god would be killed on the spot. In just a few seconds, Fat Cat sensed the flaw in the killing formation. She displayed a map in Nie Tian's sea of consciousness and said, "Follow this map." Okay. Nie Tian nodded and immediately transmitted his voice to the rest. "Follow me." Immediately, his figure moved and he directly leapt up. In the air, he dashed left and right, dodging nonstop. Finally, before the Death Gate closed, he passed through the gate. The rest of the people looked at Nie Tian and the rest in a daze. They couldn't react for a long time. Chapter 1790. As soon as Nie Tian landed, he sensed a terrifying pressure above him. His eyes narrowed and his body shook. A sword aura shot up into the sky and forcibly broke through the pressure. The person who attacked Nie Tian let out a surprised voice. He clearly didn't expect Nie Tian to be so strong. The man landed on the ground and looked at Nie Tian with a dark look in his eyes. He said coldly, "Brat, who are you? How did you pass through the death formation so easily?" Nie Tian smiled faintly. "I passed through the death formation with my own strength. Do I need to tell you?" As he spoke, Nie Tian scanned the person with his divine sense. He couldn't help but frown. The person was an early-stage paramount god. The investiture of the god's domain was worthy of being called the Upper Three Realms. Any random person from the Upper Three Realms was stronger than a peak expert from the Lower Three Realms. "Brat, it's not wise to be arrogant in front of me," the person said cold, his eyes surging with undisguised killing intent. "You want to kill me just because I passed through your death formation?" Nie Tian asked coldly. His eyes were cold. It was indeed inappropriate for him to pass through the death formation. However, he had relied on his own strength. If someone else had the ability to do so, they could also pass through the death formation. That person's eyes turned gloomy. Then, he laughed in an extremely contemptuous manner and said, "A mere high god trash isn't worthy of my attention. Given your strength, you won't survive a day in the darkness. That's my own business. You don't need to worry about it," Nie Tian Tianling replied coldly. The person's eyes suddenly turned cold, and his gaze fell on Rui Qinyu. His eyes shone with a lascivious light, and the corner of his mouth twitched. But he didn't say anything, and just stepped aside. Nietian noticed that the way the person looked at Rui Qianyu was strange. His face darkened, but he managed to restrain himself. He didn't make a move, but walked away. Nietian only wanted to enter the domain of darkness and did not want to cause any unnecessary trouble. At that moment, everyone who had entered the door of death was walking forward. Nietian and the others followed the crowd. The man looked at the backs of Nietian and the others with a sneer on the corner of his mouth and said in a deep voice, "Stinking brat, since you dare to offend me, Zhou Tongya, then prepare to leave your puny little life in Death Valley. I will take good care of the girl beside you." Although Zhou Tongya was certain that Nietian would die in the darkness, he still wanted to see Nietian die with his own eyes. More importantly, he wanted Rui Qianyu. Nietian and the others walked forward. Since they had already entered the gate of death, they were no longer in a hurry. "Nietian, how did you know how to avoid the death-killing array?" Jian Jingyan could not help but ask with a puzzled expression. He had heard that the killing formation in front of the door of death was so powerful that it could kill a paramount god. Nietian directly passed through the death-killing array. It was really too miraculous. "I have a friend beside me who is a formation master. He told me how to avoid the killing intent of the death-killing array." Nietian smiled faintly and said honestly. Jian Jingyan was stunned for a moment. He was confused and guessed that Nietian should have an expert by his side. Fat Cat did not come out at this time. Recently, he had been busy reconstructing Di Shi Tian's corporeal body. However, reconstructing a corporeal body was not a simple matter. Fortunately, Fat Cat had the Ice Demon's heart that he took from the Ice Demon Silkworm. Moreover, there were countless exotic flowers and herbs in the Nine Extremities world for him to use. He told Nietian that he would be able to restore Di Shi Tian's corporeal body in 3 months at most. Soon, 3 months were almost up. Di Shi Tian would be able to restore his corporeal body in a short period of time. He would be able to leave Nietian's origin embryo space and become a free person. Nietian was very much looking forward to the extent of Di Shi Tian's strength after restoring his corporeal body. If he could directly reach the peak of the Supreme God realm when he was alive, then it would be very interesting. Nietian would have an expert at the peak of the Supreme God realm as his helper. After a moment, Nietian and the others entered a dark valley. The space was filled with a strong space-time aura. Nietian suddenly raised his head and saw a huge space-time vortex floating above the valley. "Look, Death Fairy!" The crowd also discovered the space-time vortex in midair at this time and cried out in alarm. It turned out that the Death Fairy that led to the domain of darkness was a space-time vortex. Everyone, the space-time vortex above your head is the Death Fairy. As long as you step in, you will be able to enter the legendary domain of darkness. At this time, a vigorous voice sounded and said in a deep voice, "But you should think carefully. It is easy to enter the domain of darkness, but to come out again is as difficult as ascending to heaven." Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he turned to look at the person who spoke. It was the person who attacked him just now, Zhou Tongya. As Zhou Tongya spoke, he couldn't help but look up and down at Rui Qianyu's body. There are very few women who entered the domain of darkness, and there was not a single one like Rui Qianyu. It was not strange that Zhou Tongya had thoughts about Rui Qianyu. "I am not afraid of death. I want to enter the domain of darkness." At this moment, a ruthless voice rang out as a silhouette dashed out, heading straight for the Fairy of Death. But before he could get close to Death Fairy, he was controlled by a powerful space-time force. He couldn't resist at all and was directly crushed by the space-time pressure. He turned into a bloody light and dissipated, not even leaving behind a godhead. Seeing this scene, the crowd couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air, their eyes trembling as they looked at Zhou Tongya. Zhou Tongya curled his lips and said in a cold tone, "What's the rush? I haven't finished speaking. Death Fairy hasn't been opened yet. Trying to enter now is courting death." Everyone was stunned. Their faces were filled with fear and dread. Nietian looked at Death's Fairy and sensed its aura. It was an enormous space-time vortex. When it wasn't activated, even a paramount god would be crushed by the space-time tempests if they entered it. Hurry up and open Death Fairy. Someone couldn't help but yell. There's no rush. Zhou Tongya, on the other hand, gave a sinister smile and took a step forward. Surprisingly, he was not far from Yetian. With a dark look in his eyes, he said, "Before we open the Fairy of Death, I still have something to do." "What do you want?" Yetian's face darkened cold. "Kid, you just offended me. I want you to kneel down and apologize to me." Zhou Tongya chuckled. Then his gaze shifted to Rui Qinyu. His eyes shone with a lascivious light. "As for this little beauty, there's no need for her to enter the domain of darkness. With her strength, entering the domain of darkness would mean death anyway. She might as well stay by my side and serve me well." As he spoke, Zhou Tongya took a step forward, intending to make a move on Rui Qinyu. Rui Qinyu took a step back, her face red and embarrassed. Tian's eyes narrowed. He felt the blood in his body flow in reverse, tumbling and tumbling, as if he was about to explode. Zhou Tongya dared to flirt with Rui Qinyu in front of Tian. If Tian continued to tolerate it, he wouldn't be Tian. Chapter 1791. Tian's eyes locked onto Zhou Tongya. Killing intent spread out from his body, filling the air with a suffocating, cold, killing intent. What a terrifying killing intent. The crowd could feel the almost tangible killing intent. They couldn't help but tremble and cry out in their hearts. It was unbelievable that Tian could display such a terrifying killing intent in the face of a superior god. Under normal circumstances, a superior god wouldn't even have the courage to look a superior god in the eye. But Tian's killing intent was so strong that it showed how determined he was to kill. "Brat, do you want to kill me?" Zhou Tongya felt Tian's killing intent and was secretly shocked. Then he glanced at the crowd and said in a loud voice, "Listen up, if you want to enter the Fairy of Death, you have to kill this silver-haired brat first." The crowd was stunned for a moment. Then they reacted and looked at Tian fiercely. Zhou Tongya didn't do it himself, but let these desperados who wanted to enter the zone of darkness do it. In any case, these people entered the zone of darkness to kill. Killing one more person was nothing to them. "Brat, you delayed me from entering the zone of darkness. Die." Just as Zhou Tongya's words left his mouth, a ruthless voice rang out. Immediately after, a figure leapt high into the air and sent a palm strike towards Tian. The surging palm force pressed towards Tian with a heavy aura. At this moment, Tian's cold eyes were fixed on Zhou Tongya. He didn't care about anyone else. "You're courting death." Almost at the same time, a low roar sounded out, and then a sword shadow shot up into the sky, directly breaking through the palm energy. The figure in the sky didn't even have time to scream and died on the spot, turning into a bloody light and dissipating. "If you want to hurt my friend, you'll have to get through me first." Jian Jingyan took a step forward and released a sharp sword aura from his body. His entire body looked like a sharp sword as he stood there. He was the one who killed that person just now. This person is so strong. When the crowd saw Jian Jingyan's aura, they couldn't help but tremble. Their backs were drenched in cold sweat. They didn't dare to step forward. Most of the people who entered the darkness were god lords, with very few paramount gods. Jian Jingyan was a peak overgod expert, so of course he could intimidate them. Zhou Tongya suddenly looked at Jian Jingyan. He did not expect Jian Jingyan to be so strong. It was beyond his expectations. He is Jian family's Jian Jingyan. At this time, someone recognized Jian Jingyan and loudly cried out, "Oh my god, Jian Jingyan, the 9th overgod of the 9 territories overgods ranking." The others cried out in alarm one after another. Their expressions were filled with endless shock. They never thought that someone like Jian Jingyan would actually appear here. No one could understand why Jian Jingyan would want to go to the darkness region with his status. Although the Jian family was weaker than the Wind and Cloud Alliance and the Xingtian Alliance, they were still one of the 9 great families. Jian Jingyan was a genius of the Jian family, so there was no need for him to go to the domain of darkness. So, you are Jian Jingyun. No wonder you are so strong. When Zhou Tongya found out about Jian Jingyun's identity, he was slightly surprised. At the same time, he was also a little fearful. He said solemnly, "Young Master Jian, you entered the domain of darkness to gain experience, right? That has nothing to do with you." Jian Jingyun replied coldly. The corner of Zhou Tongya's mouth twitched a few times. His eyes darkened and a murderous intent flashed in them. He said coldly, "Jian Jingyun, let me give you a piece of advice. Mind your own business. If you interfere with the Death's Fairy, I'm afraid you will die before you even enter the domain of darkness." A threat, a naked threat. Zhou Tongya was indeed afraid of Jian Jingyun's identity. However, since Jian Jingyun wanted to enter the domain of darkness, it was normal for him to die. "You think you can kill me?" Jian Jingyun swept his gaze over and laughed coldly. He was extremely arrogant. Zhou Tongya had the strength of an early paramount god. However, if it was a battle of life and death, Jian Jingyun was not afraid of him. The top 10 of the overgods ranking all had the strength to fight an early paramount god. "Jian Jingyun, you are courting death." Zhou Tongya could feel the sarcasm in Jian Jingyun's words. He immediately roared in anger. His figure flashed, and he actually attacked. A violent palm pressed down, forcing everyone to retreat. Bang! However, at that moment, a terrifying sword shadow appeared in the air and blocked Zhou Tongya's palm. Immediately, Nie Tian stepped forward and stood in front of Zhou Tongya. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He said coldly, "Your life is mine." Huh? Zhou Tongya was stunned. He could not hide the shock in his eyes. He saw terrifying black runes surging around Nie Tian. His strength had actually increased to the late over-god level. In the blink of an eye, his strength had increased by an entire realm. How was that possible? Zhou Tongya could not help but be stunned. He had no idea how Nie Tian had done it. "I'll kill you with one sword." Nie Tian's eyes were filled with killing intent. He stared at Zhou Tongya. His cold voice rang through the air like a death knell from hell. It was extremely intimidating. He had said that Zhou Tongya was dead for sure. Not only did he want Zhou Tongya dead, he wanted to kill him with his own hands. Has this kid lost his mind? The crowd watched from afar as their expressions changed strangely. They all suspected that Nie Tian had lost his mind. Even with his strength as a late overgod, it was impossible for him to kill a overgod in a single stroke. "Brat, do you think I'm a sick cat just because I don't show my might? What a joke if a piece of trash like you wants to kill me." Zhou Tongya was absolutely furious. His presence surged, and a black spear appeared in his hand. It was extremely sharp, as if it could split the world. Nie Tian gripped the stellar heavenly slash tightly. Starlight flickered around him as sword intent and vital energy surged at the same time. "Die!" In the next moment, Zhou Tongya bellowed out furiously. He suddenly struck out with the black spear in his hand. It was like a dragon, powerful and heavy. A shadow as heavy as a mountain appeared, hurtling towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian stood where he was. His expression was as calm as a cold pool at the bottom of a well, without the slightest ripple. When the spear shadow was only 100 meters away from him, Nie Tian suddenly moved. He raised the long sword in his hand and slashed it through the air. His sword intent and blood chi instantly fused together and converged into a terrifying sword shadow. Then it whizzed out like a giant blood-red snake. Boom! There was a great sound, and wherever the blood-red shadow passed, the shadow of the spear directly collapsed. "No!" Zhou Tongya immediately sensed that something was wrong. He howled miserably, and his face became as pale as paper. Unfortunately, it was all too late. The surging shadow of the sword came crashing over like a tidal wave. It was as if it could devour everything. Zhou Tongya's eyes trembled violently. His face was filled with extreme fear. Never did he think that a piece of trash that he did not even want to look at could actually unleash such terrifying power. Just when the shadow of the sword was about to land, something happened. "Don't kill him." A deep, furious roar rang out in the air. Afterwards, the shadow of a palm whistled over. Immediately, the world seemed like it was about to collapse, and the space trembled. The target of the palm was clear. It was heading straight for Nietion. Chapter 1792. You're not allowed to kill him. In mid-air, a deep roar rang out once again, and the palm shadow came crashing down towards Nietion like a huge mountain. However, Nietion had already made up his mind to kill Zhou Tongtong. Sword intent surged around him, and he had no intention of stopping. Die for me, Nietion roared in a low voice. Instantly, the sword silhouettes flew out and completely engulfed Zhou Tongya's figure. Just as Zhou Tongya was about to die, he heard the sudden voice and smiled. However, before he could finish that smile, he was turned into ashes. All that was left was a godhead floating in the air. At the same time as Zhou Tongya's tragic death, that frightening palm shadow descended with a loud rumble. Bang! A muffled boom rang out in the air as Nietion's figure was directly sent flying backwards, drawing a bloody arc in the air before he smashed directly into a 10,000-meter-high cliff in the valley. The entire valley shook violently, as if it would collapse at any moment. Tongya! A moment later, a black-robed figure appeared and landed on the ground. Looking at the floating godhead in the air, he howled in grief and indignation. Nietion! At the same time, Rui Qinyu and the others' voices rang out, their eyes trembling as they stared at the cliffs in the valley. Nietion had been smashed into the cliff with a single palm strike, and it was hard to say whether he was still alive. Jian Jingyun was relatively calm as he scanned the black-robed figure. As soon as he sensed his strength, his heart sank, and a chill ran down his spine. This black-robed figure was actually a late paramount god. In the paramount realm, the difference between each minor level was equivalent to an entire major realm. This person was actually a late paramount god. Even in the 9 great realms, such a person would be considered a top expert. Could Nietion survive a palm strike from a late paramount god? Damn it! The black-robed figure suddenly realized that there wasn't even the slightest trace of divine sense left in Zhou Tongya's godhead. He couldn't help but roar like a crazed beast. Nietion's sword intent contained a soul-devouring sword intent, which could directly erase the consciousness within a godhead. Those who were killed by him, even if their godheads were still intact, would have their divine consciousness erased. In that case, even if the black-clothed cultivator possessed an item that could reconstruct a body, it would be impossible for him to revive Zhou Tongya. Smelly brat, you killed my nephew. Killing you with a single palm is too easy for you. The black-clothed cultivator suddenly looked towards the mountain cliff and roared, both of his eyes turning bloodshot. He was none other than Zhou Tongya's second uncle, Zhou Chuyang. Zhou Chuyang had never imagined that Zhou Tongya would die at the hands of another. Bang! However, before Zhou Chuyang had finished speaking, the sound of a rock exploding suddenly rang out from the cliff. Then, a blood-red figure stepped out from the cliff and stood in the air. It's him! The sudden turn of events caused the crowd to be stunned. Everyone looked at the blood-red figure with burning eyes, their eyes trembling. Nietion was actually still alive. Who would have thought that Nietion would still be alive after taking a direct blow from a late paramount god? Although his body was a bloody mess, his aura was extremely stable. Nietion. Seeing Nietion's figure appear, Rainy Rain Leaves was so happy that she began to cry. She couldn't help but shed tears of joy. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuzan were also stunned. Their eyes trembled, unable to believe the scene in front of them. Only now did Jian Jingyun realize how terrifying Nietion's strength was. Killing Zhou Tongya with a single strike was already beyond Jian Jingyun's imagination. Jian Jingyun was confident that he could fight Zhou Tongya, but it was impossible for him to kill Zhou Tongya with a single strike. However, Jian Jingyun now understood that Nietion's inconceivably powerful sword intent was not the most frightening thing about him. The most frightening thing about him was his monstrously powerful martial body. Even though he was a late-stage overgod, Being able to take a direct blow from a late paramount god and not die showed how powerful his martial body was. Jian Jingyan could not imagine that Nie Tian, who is only a mid-stage high god under normal circumstances, would be so powerful. Nie Tian stood in midair. His body trembled slightly, and the blood on his body was washed away. The wounds on his body healed in an instant. His face was slightly pale, but other than that, he was not injured at all. The crowd gasped when they saw Nie Tian's transformation. They could not believe what they were seeing. Nie Tian's martial body was too terrifying. He could heal such serious injuries in an instant. At this moment, Zhou Chuyang, who had been in a daze for a long time, finally reacted. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He was already extremely shocked when he saw that Nie Tian was still alive. Now that he saw Nie Tian recover in an instant, the shock in his heart could not be any greater. However, this was not what he was paying attention to. What really caught his attention was that he sensed an extremely interesting aura in Nie Tian's body. Stinking brat, no wonder your martial body is so powerful. You have fused with the earth vein source, Zhou Chuyang said in a deep voice. His eyes were trembling with unconcealable passion. The earth vein source. Just as Nie Tian was recovering from his injuries, Zhou Chuyang sensed the aura of the earth vein source in his body. Hearing Zhou Chuyang mention the earth vein source, Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly. He had indeed used the energy of the earth vein source to recover in an instant. The source of the earth vein was the earth element origin energy, and it contained a boundless life force. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Nie Tian was not killed in an instant, he could use the earth vein source to recover no matter how serious his injuries were. The fusion of demonic qi with the earth vein source had greatly improved Nie Tian's martial body. This was why he could withstand Zhou Chuyang's palm strike without dying. Nie Tian was a little confused. How did Zhou Chuyang know about the earth vein source? Looking at Zhou Chuyang's reaction, it seemed that he was very familiar with the earth vein source and had some ideas about it. Brat, the earth vein source is not enough to strengthen your martial body to such an extent. It seems like you have many good things on you. Zhou Chuyang looked at Nie Tian with a deep gaze. His eyes were filled with greed. Nie Tian frowned and said cold, "Do you want to get the things on me?" As he spoke, Nie Tian's figure moved slightly and slowly approached the Death's Fairy. At the same time, he transmitted a message to Rui Qinyu and the others, prepare to leave. Zhou Chuyang saw Nie Tian approaching the Death's Fairy, and his eyes trembled. He thought that Nie Tian was going to fight to the death and said nervously, "Brat, the Death Fairy is not opened yet. What are you doing?" If one tried to force their way in before the Death Fairy opened, it would be tantamount to courting death. Since you are not willing to open the Death's Fairy, then let me open it. Nie Tian's lips curled into a smile. Then, a pale white flame appeared in his palm. It was the universe boundary. Nie Tian wanted to use the universe boundary to open the Death's Fairy by force. With a thought from Nie Tian, endless lines of space and time were released from the boundary of the universe, which quickly intersected and condensed into the shape of a sharp blade. Since the Death's Fairy was a space-time whirlpool and the universe boundary could create universe lines, then it could be used to tear open the Death's Fairy. Nie Tian took a step forward and controlled the universe boundary, extending it towards the Death's Fairy. Chapter 1793. The crowd looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes. They had no idea what he was going to do. No one could sense the existence of the cosmic rays. They thought that Nie Tian was going to force his way through the Death Fairy. Previously, a martial artist had tried to force his way through the Death Fairy and ended up dead. Many people's eyes lit up as if they could already see Nie Tian being crushed by the space-time pressure. Nie Tian ignored them. He carefully controlled the cosmic blade formed by the cosmic rays and slowly approached the space-time vortex in front of him. Puff! The moment the cosmic blade pierced into the space-time vortex, Nie Tian heard a faint tearing sound. Then he stretched out his hands and tore open a passage several meters wide above the space-time vortex. When the crowd saw this, they were completely dumbfounded. They couldn't believe what they were seeing and thought that they were seeing things. How could someone tear open a space-time vortex in this world? Zhou Qiang's eyes were wide open. He opened his mouth, but couldn't make a sound. Nie Tian's method was too scary. It was unimaginable and unpredictable. Chinya. A hint of a smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth as he sent a voice transmission to Raindrop Thousand Leaves. Only then did the latter react. Her figure blurred in emotion, and she arrived at Nie Tian's side, then stepped into Death's Ferry. Then, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also arrived and stepped into the Death Ferry. See you. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled up into a smile as he looked back at Zhou Chuyang. Then, with a flicker of his body, he disappeared into the Death's Ferry. The moment his figure disappeared, the passage above the Death's Ferry closed. Only after Nie Tian's figure had completely disappeared from everyone's sight did they have a slight reaction. Their faces were filled with shock, and they were speechless for a long time. How was this possible? After a long time, Zhou Qiang's eyes trembled, and he reacted. His voice trembled, and he couldn't believe what had just happened. Nie Tian had torn open the space-time vortex. That was too scary. Even a peak paramount god might not be able to do such a thing. Zhou Qiang shook his head and took 3 deep breaths before he regained some of his composure. Guards! He thought for a moment and then roared. A black figure appeared and stood respectfully in front of Zhou Qiang. Inform the clan elder council that there's news of the earth vein source. Zhou Qiang transmitted his voice to that person, and a sound recording stone appeared in his hand. He gave it to that person and said, "Give this sound recording stone to the elder council and let them know everything." The audio recording stone was a magical stone that could record everything. The man took the sound recording stone and left in a flash. The Zhou clan was one of the 9 great clans of the Genesis era. They had been searching for the earth essence, which was why Zhou Chuyang was so excited when he saw Nie Tian had the Terra vein source. Activate the Death Fairy. At this moment, Zhou Chuyang looked at the Death Fairy and roared. 4 black-garbed cultivators appeared, each with a jade medallion in their hand. They performed an incantation gesture at the same time, which caused the medallions to release 4 streams of mysterious power that converged and shot toward the Death Fairy. In the next moment, something miraculous happened. The Death Fairy shuddered, and a rift opened up, which gradually expanded until it became a passageway. "The Death Fairy is open. Hurry up!" Someone shouted when he saw the Death Fairy opening. His silhouette flickered as he tried to enter. However, as soon as he was in midair, a powerful palm force slammed into him and killed him on the spot. "I'll go first," said a deep voice, and a figure appeared. Everyone looked up to see that it was Zhou Chuyang. Zhou Chuyang was also going to enter the darkness realm. "Stinking brat, I'm definitely going to get the Terra vein source." The corners of Zhou Chuyang's mouth curled up into a sinister smile as he entered the Death Fairy. In order to get the Terra vein source from Nie Tian, Zhou Chuyang didn't hesitate to enter the darkness realm himself. It wasn't until Zhou Qiang's silhouette disappeared that everyone dared to approach the Death Fairy. Just as everyone was trying to squeeze their way into the Death Fairy, Nie Tian and his group had already arrived at the Darkness Realm. The Darkness Realm, a place of blood and carnage. Nie Tian walked out of the Death Fairy. The moment he stepped into the Darkness Realm, he could feel the heavy stench of blood all around him. "Let's leave this place first." Nie Tian glanced at the dark mountain range below him and spoke in a low voice. First, he wanted to leave this place. He knew that there would be a large number of people entering from the Death Fairy. He didn't want to stay here for too long. The 4 of them soared through the air, and very quickly, they were hundreds of miles away. Nie Tian signaled for everyone to stop, and a few of them landed on the outskirts of a mountain range. "Nie Tian, are you all right?" Rui Qinyu was worried about Nie Tian and asked anxiously. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Nie Tian smiled. His recovery ability could be said to be abnormal. At this moment, he had completely recovered. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan were shocked. They admired Nie Tian from the bottom of their hearts. Especially the scene where Nie Tian directly tore open the Death Fairy. It was too shocking. Nie Tian smiled faintly and began to observe the surrounding environment. The darkness realm. The entire world was dark, and the light was weak, as if it was shrouded in dark clouds all year round. The space was filled with a strong stench of blood, giving people a suffocating pressure. Other than that, the darkness realm was not much different from the outside world. Nietian carefully sensed the stench of blood in the space. It was very fresh, as if someone had just been killed. In the darkness realm, there were large numbers of people dying every moment. It was not strange for there to be such a strong stench of blood in the air. Nietian didn't care too much and prepared to leave the mountain range. Nietian carefully sensed the stench of blood in the space. However, at this time, the fat cat's voice suddenly sounded. Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly. Fat Cat was busy reconstructing Sakura's body. He wouldn't come out for ordinary things. Now that he spoke, he must have discovered something. Nietian took a deep breath and activated the holographic divine rune. He carefully sensed the stench of blood in the air. At first, he didn't feel anything strange, but as he became more and more meticulous, he finally found something wrong. Nietian sensed that there were strange blood-colored runes surging in the surrounding space. Those runes were very precise and subtle. They were almost integrated with the space. They were hidden in the stench of blood and were very difficult to discover. Perhaps only little Fat Cat's abnormal perception would be able to discover it. Fat, what are these runes? Nietian frowned and asked solemnly. He had seen many runes. Although these blood-colored runes were not the strongest, the stench of blood contained in them was extremely strong, giving people a very evil feeling. I don't know either. Fat Cat's face was a little dignified. He shook his head and said, I can sense that these runes are extremely unusual. After a martial artist absorbs these runes, he will gradually lose his mind and finally go crazy. Chapter 1794. Blood Evil Chi. Before coming to the realm of darkness, Gue Wuzan had once told Nietian about the rumor that the realm of darkness was filled with murderous blood chi. Those who entered and absorbed the murderous blood chi would slowly become deranged, ultimately becoming a bloodthirsty, murderous demon. At that time, Nietian didn't take Gue Wuzan's words to heart. But now, it seems that the rumor of the blood evil chi in the realm of darkness was true. Nietian carefully sensed the blood-colored runes and increasingly felt the blood chi contained within them. Nietian, these blood-colored runes are very strange. They can continuously penetrate into a martial artist's body without being detected. When the blood-colored runes are concentrated to a certain extent, it will slowly affect a martial artist's divine sense, causing them to become violent and bloodthirsty. Fat Cat's blue eyes trembled as it said in a deep voice. Nietian frowned. He sensed his body and found that the blood-colored runes had indeed penetrated into his body, but it was extremely difficult to detect. He tried to force the blood-colored runes out of his body, but found that it wasn't that easy. The blood-colored runes had actually fused with his blood, becoming undetectable. Nietian, don't waste your energy. You can't force these runes out. Moreover, as long as you're in the realm of darkness, you will continue to absorb these runes. Fat Cat helplessly shook its head. Why? Nietian was stunned for a moment, but he still didn't give up. After trying a few times, he failed. The more he tried to force the blood-colored runes out, the more he found that the blood-colored runes were fusing with his blood. These blood-colored runes fuse with a martial artist's blood. If you want to force them out, you'll have to bleed yourself. Fat Cat frowned and said, This lord feels that these runes are very strange. There might be a big secret hidden behind them. Nietian's face couldn't help but sink. His gaze swept across Rui Qinyu and the others. He knew that the others were also constantly absorbing the blood-colored runes. Before figuring out what these blood-colored runes were, Nietian first changed the blood-colored runes into Blood Fiend runes. Nietian couldn't even force out the Blood Fiend runes from his own body. Of course, it was impossible for him to force out the Blood Fiend runes from other people's bodies. Fatty, in your opinion, how long do you think the Blood Spirit runes will take to make a cultivator lose all reason? Nietian asked anxiously after taking a deep breath to calm himself down. That depends on the martial art practitioner's temperament. The fat cat nodded and said, people who are bloodthirsty are more easily influenced by the blood fiend runes. A person with a determined mind would have a stronger resistance to the blood fiend seals. According to this lord's estimates, if a normal martial artist were to be invaded by the blood fiend seal runes, they would completely lose all reason within half a year. Half a year? That's good. Nyetian heaved a long sigh of relief. He didn't plan to stay in the realm of darkness for half a year. As long as they found Ghost Martial Wild Sand, they would immediately leave. Nyetian, you don't have to worry. With your abilities, even if you stay in the realm of darkness for tens of years, you won't be affected by the blood fiend seal runes. The fat cat suddenly laughed and said indifferently, why? Nyetian was startled once again. He didn't understand. He didn't believe that his temperament was so strong to such an extent. Speaking of which, Nyetian was also a cruel person. When he attacked his enemies, he was vicious and merciless. Moreover, Sherrod said that his blood contained an evil aura, and that his killing intent was very strong. This lord has sensed it. The power of the divine and demon has a very strong devouring and suppressing effect on the blood fiend seal runes. As long as you use the power of the divine and demon, you'll be able to devour the blood fiend seal runes. The fat cat laughed and said proudly, really? Nyetian frowned and tried to use the power of the divine and demon. He released the power of the divine and demon and circulated it in his blood. As expected, the blood fiend seal runes were completely devoured. After confirming this, Nyetian became much colder. In order not to cause panic, Nyetian didn't tell the others about his discovery. Let's leave this place first. Nyetian nodded slightly and turned around, preparing to leave the mountain range. However, at this moment, dozens of black silhouettes dashed out from the mountain range. Their auras were wild and wild. They actually dashed towards Nyetian and the others in a frenzy. Nyetian's gaze froze and his expression changed. He signaled Jian Jingyun and the others to be careful. Kill! The person in the lead roared and dashed towards them. A terrifying aura filled the air. He fiercely struck out with his palm, and the power of his palm swept towards them. Nyetian's gaze locked onto that person. When he saw the person's eyes clearly, his heart couldn't help but sink. It was a pair of bloodshot eyes. Other than the most instinctive killing intent, nothing else could be seen. Boom! Nyetian casually stabbed out with his sword. The shadow of the sword flew out like a rainbow, shattering the palm in the air and rushing towards the person who had attacked. Bang! After a muffled sound, the person's body was directly engulfed by the shadow of the sword. He turned into a bloody light and disappeared. Kill! 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 At this moment, the other people dashed forward and attacked recklessly. There was no hesitation or fear at all. There was only the most intense killing intent. Boom! Boom! Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan attacked at the same time. Dozens of silhouettes were directly killed. They didn't even have the time to scream. However, the remaining dozens of silhouettes were still ruthless and ferocious. They directly charged towards them. You don't know what's good for you. Jian Jingyun's expression darkened. He struck out with his sword fiercely, and a huge shadow of the sword that was thousands of meters long fell. A huge pit appeared on the ground, as if the ground had been forcefully torn apart. Dozens of silhouettes were directly killed by Jian Jingyun's sword without being able to resist at all. Although these people were ferocious and bloodthirsty, they weren't very strong. Basically, they were all early god. What's going on? Have these people gone mad? Gue Wuchan took a step forward. He was confused. He had no idea what was going on. Although the darkness region was a place of slaughter, there was no need for them to come here and die for no reason. Nyetian frowned and said with a gloomy expression, "These people have indeed gone mad." He saw with his own eyes that the eyes of these people were bloodshot. They had completely lost their rationality and were completely devoured by the blood fiend runes. Gue Wuchan was stunned. He suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Could they have been controlled by the blood fiend Qi?" "Yes." Nyetian nodded and said, "The The space we are in right now is filled with blood fiend runes. These people must have come to the darkness region a long time ago. They've already been controlled by the blood fiend runes and turned into killing machines. Look, they've appeared again. At this moment, Rui Chinyu suddenly cried out and pointed into the distance. Nietian raised his head and saw a black mass of figures in the mountain range. They were all killing machines controlled by the blood fiend runes. Let's leave here. Nietian frowned. Without any hesitation, he moved and flew off into the distance. They flew several tens of thousands of meters away. The killing machines actually stopped after chasing them for a while and quickly retreated into the mountain range. Nietian could not help but frown when he saw this. He was very confused as to why these people had stopped chasing. However, he did not think too much about it. Nietian, there's a city over there. Let's go there first, Jian Jingyun said grimly as he gazed at the dark city in the distance. Chapter 1795. In the realm of darkness, there was a city of darkness that stood tall in the darkness. It was like a gigantic monster that wanted to devour everything. Nietian's group of 4 stood in the air and arrived outside the city gate of the dark city. Jian Jingyun took a step forward and wanted to enter the city, but Nietian stopped him. Jian Jingyun, it's better to be careful. If a bunch of crazy people suddenly appear in the city, it won't be fun. Gue Wushan looked at Jian Jingyun and laughed. Jian Jingyun slightly nodded and became more cautious. After experiencing the previous incident, they had already experienced the dangers of the realm of darkness. It was always better to be more cautious. Yet Tian looked outside the city for a while, but there was no movement for a long time. He couldn't help but frown and have a puzzled look on his face. The city gate was open and there were no guards. It seemed that anyone could enter and leave the city freely. Let's enter the city. Nietian thought for a while and decided to enter the city. He signaled the others to wait and took a step forward. Nietian's figure landed on the city wall. He still couldn't sense any aura. The puzzlement on his face became heavier. This city seemed to be a dead city. Nietian, are you all right? Jian Jingyun shouted and asked. Nietian waved his hand and signaled the others to come over. Jian Jingyun and the other 2 moved and landed beside Nietian. This is an empty city? Gue Wushan looked at the lifeless street and couldn't help but let out a strange cry. Nietian nodded and said, let's get into the city first. Then, he landed on the ground and entered the city along a wide street. They didn't see a single person along the way. It didn't take long for Nietian to discover that this was a ring-shaped city with several walls. The place where they had entered the city was only the first wall, and after entering the city, there were a few more walls. Moreover, the closer they got to the center of the city, the taller the walls became. But the strange thing was that there was no one guarding the walls. This should be the 7th layer of the city wall. Gue Wushan looked at the hundreds of meters tall wall in front of him and said speechlessly, who would have thought that a small city like this would have 7 layers of walls? Be careful. At this moment, Nietian's expression suddenly changed. He then let out a scream and took a step forward. His silhouette shot up into the sky, and a strong sword intent was released from his body. Boom! At the same time, a palm force pierced through the air, colliding head-on with Nietian's sword shadow. A deafening sound rang out in the air, followed by a terrifying shockwave, causing the city wall to tremble. Nietian's figure swayed slightly, and then he stood steadily on the city wall. In front of him, 3 figures descended, their cold gazes locked onto him. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan looked at each other. Immediately after, their figures flashed, and they leapt onto the city wall. They stood behind Nietian, and their expressions were slightly nervous. Who are you people? Nietianling said coldly. He saw that although the eyes of the 3 people opposite him were cold, they were not blood-red. Clearly, they were not controlled by the blood fiend runes. What powerful senses you have, sir, the leader said gruffly. His tense expression eased up quite a bit, and he said, you're the first person to be able to sense our existence from 10,000 meters away. The person seemed to be middle-aged, and he was not very powerful. He was only a late overgod, while the 2 people behind him were only early overgods. The person who had struck out earlier was this middle-aged man. He was extremely surprised at the moment. How had Nie Tian discovered them? And how had he managed to receive his palm strike? After all, he was a late overgod, while Nie Tian was only a mid-overgod. Asked who you are. Why have you attacked us? Nie Tian's eyes sank slightly. His voice became cold and filled with killing intent. The three of them were not powerful. They posed no threat to Nie Tian and the others at all. If they did not answer honestly, Nie Tian would definitely attack them. The middle-aged man glanced at Nie Tian before glancing past Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. After some thought, he said, I'm Shun Tao, a guard of the 7 dark cities. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at Shun Tao. He was not sure whether Shun Tao was telling the truth or not. Sir, you've only just arrived in the darkness region, right? Shun Tao looked at Nie Tian and asked in a probing manner, Are we in the 7 dark cities? Nie Tian did not answer Shun Tao's question. His eyes flickered as he asked with a deep voice. Yes. Shun Tao could feel the pressure in Nie Tian's eyes, so he answered honestly, There are a total of 9 cities outside the Dark Mountain Range, from Darkness 1 to Darkness 9. We're currently in the 7 dark cities. With that, a map scroll appeared in Shun Tao's hand, and he tossed it to Nie Tian. Nie Tian unfurled the map, and the entire darkness region appeared before him. The radius of the darkness region was not large, about 10,000 miles. The Dark Mountain Range was in the center, and there were 9 cities outside, from Darkness 1 to Darkness 9. Nie Tian and the others were currently in the 7 dark cities. They had just arrived at the periphery of the Dark Mountain Range. The Dark Mountain Range occupied the majority of the darkness region, but there was no record of it on the map. I'll take the map. Lead us into the city, Nie Tian said indifferently as he kept the map. Shun Tao was stunned for a moment, but he had no choice but to obediently lead the way. After a while, Nie Tian and the others entered the city, but the scene in front of them was far beyond their expectations. The environment here was no different from the outside world. It was actually a rather prosperous small city. Are we in the wrong place? Is this the darkness region? Gue Wuchan looked at the scene in front of him, and he could not believe it. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth also rose into a smile, as he found it hard to understand. The darkness region was known as the land of slaughter, but there was actually such a quiet and peaceful city. It was simply a paradise. Young master, you have entered the city. We brothers will take our leave now. Shun Tao bowed slightly to Nie Tian and said cautiously, They can leave, but you have to stay. Nie Tian looked at Shun Tao and said with a faint smile, I still have some questions to ask you. Shun Tao's face stiffened, and he swallowed his saliva. But when he saw Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan behind Nie Tian, he could only nod his head in agreement. He was not afraid of Nie Tian's strength, but Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan. But he did not know that Nie Tian's strength was even more terrifying than Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan's. Then, Shun Tao brought Nie Tian and the others to a restaurant, and they entered a private room. What's going on, Shun Tao? Nie Tian sat down and asked, not wanting to stand on ceremony. What do you mean, what's going on? Shun Tao was stunned for a moment, but he still pretended to be confused. Nie Tian's face sank, and he said, I'm asking you what's going on with the 7 dark cities. The scene here doesn't seem like the darkness region at all. Shun Tao frowned, and he said with an awkward expression, My lord, I'm just a small guard of the 7 dark cities. When I first came to the 7 dark cities, I was just as strange as you. Later on, I stayed in the 7 dark cities, and the city lord took a fancy to me, and I became a small guard. As for what's going on with the 7 dark cities, I really don't know. Nie Tian stared at Shun Tao, and when he saw that the latter did not seem to be lying, he couldn't help pondering. In the darkness of the land of slaughter, a quiet little city had actually appeared. This was really too strange. Chapter 1796. City Lord. Nie Tian was stunned when he heard Shun Tao mention the city lord. The corner of his mouth twitched. Nie Tian really wanted to know everything there was to know about the 7 dark cities. However, he had to consider the risks involved if he went to the city lord without any preparation. Although the seven dark cities appeared to be very peaceful, no one knew what kind of person the city lord was. Perhaps he was a homicidal maniac who would kill people at the slightest disagreement. Have you seen the city lord before? Nietian looked at Shun Tao and asked in a deep voice. I've seen him once. Shun Tao nodded and added, I've only seen the back of the city lord from afar. Nietian couldn't help smiling. He originally wanted to ask Shun Tao about the city lord, but it seemed that Shun Tao was just a small fry who didn't know anything. After a moment of pondering, Nietian's eyes glittered as he said, Shun Tao, I have one last question for you. You may leave after you answer it. What question? Shun Tao was slightly surprised and couldn't help feeling nervous. Have you heard of the Black Lotus organization? Nietian's eyes narrowed as he asked in a deep voice. The Black Lotus was something that Nietian had heard from Gue Wuchan. It was rumored to be the ruler of the realm of darkness. Nietian guessed that the city lord of the seven dark cities was most likely someone from the Black Lotus. Black Lotus? Shun Tao's eyes couldn't help trembling when he heard these two words. His face was filled with horror as he repeatedly shook his head. Never heard of it. Never heard of it. Nietian's expression sank. Shun Tao's reaction clearly indicated that he had heard of it. From Shun Tao's appearance, it seemed that he was extremely afraid of the Black Lotus. Shun Tao, you can leave. Nietian thought for a moment and waved his hand. Shun Tao was stunned for a moment before he reacted and quickly got up to leave. Nietian, why did you let him go? He clearly knows about the Black Lotus. It's a good opportunity to ask him about it. Jian Jingyun asked with a puzzled expression after Shun Tao left. Nietian faintly smiled and said, Shun Tao's status is too low. He's just a small fry. Even if he knows about the Black Lotus, I'm afraid that it's just hearsay. It's impossible to understand the Black Lotus from his mouth. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan looked at each other and slightly nodded their heads. They felt that what Nietian said made sense. However, they at least knew one thing now, and that was that the Black Lotus really existed. Nietian, are you going to see the Castellan of the Seven Dark Cities? Rui Qinyu could not help but guess something when she saw Nietian's gloomy face. Yes. Nietian looked at Rui Qinyu and nodded solemnly. If you want to know more about Darkness City and the Realm of Darkness, you must go see the City Lord. Nietian, we have only just arrived here. We have yet to figure out the situation here. To go look for the City Lord straight away is too rash, Jian Jingyun said with a frown. They didn't know anything about the Seven Dark Cities' City Lords, so it was indeed very abrupt for them to look for them so rashly. Since the City Lord was a City Lord, he would definitely not be weak. If he became hostile to Nietian and the others after seeing them, it would be bad. Nietian thought about it and nodded. Let's wait a few days first. Afterwards, Nietian and the others left the restaurant. They planned to ask around for information in the next few days. Perhaps they might be able to find information about Gue Wuchan. After wandering around the city for a few days, Nietian discovered that there were guards patrolling everywhere. Every single guard was very nervous, constantly observing the people around them. 3 days later, Nietian and the others did not find anything valuable, so they decided to pay a visit to the City Lord's mansion. The four of them arrived outside the City Lord's mansion. They looked at the majestic mansion and did not hesitate at all. They prepared to step in. Who is it? Just as Nietian arrived at the entrance of the City Lord's mansion, two figures descended from the sky. Their auras surged, and they were filled with killing intent. Nietian glanced at the two of them and scanned them with the senses of his soul. He discovered that they were not weak. They were actually mid-over-gods. Sirs, we are cultivators from the Seven Dark Cities. We have some matters that we would like to ask the City Lord about. Please pass on a message for us. Nietian bowed slightly and said indifferently. He had come to visit the City Lord after all, so he obviously had to be polite to the people of the City Lord's mansion. The two guards glanced past Nietian and the others. One of them smiled coldly and said, Many people come to the Seven Dark Cities every day. Do you think the City Lord is someone you can see whenever you want? Nietian frowned slightly, but he still suppressed his anger. He said indifferently, Sirs, I really do have matters to discuss with the City Lord. Please pass on a message for me. With that, a godhead of a higher god appeared in Yetion's hand, and he passed it over. He did not want to cause any unnecessary trouble, so he chose to lower his head for now. Oomph. The two guards glanced at the godhead and smiled cold. They said scornfully, "You want us to do something for you with a mere godhead of a higher god? Do you think we are beggars?" Yetion's eyes suddenly darkened. His patience was about to run out. He abruptly raised his head to look at the two guards and said cold, "What do you want?" "What do I want?" One of the guards sneered. Then he glanced past Rui Qianyu and chuckled. "This little girl is quite pretty. It would be a waste for her to stay with you. Why don't you keep her and let her play with us? You can just enter the mansion. What do you think?" "Nothing much." Yetion's pupils shrank and his face grew grim. Terrifying, killing intent surged from his body as he said these words one word at a time. "Brat, do you want to fight?" The two guards were not afraid when they saw that Yetion was enraged. Instead, they laughed maniacally and said, "A mid-stage higher god trash dares to be so arrogant in the mansion. You are courting death." Before the two guards could finish their words, two sword wheels suddenly whizzed out. Although the sword wheels were not very imposing, they were extremely swift and fierce. Uft, uft. Immediately, two sounds of flesh being torn were heard. The two guards' arms were cut off and blood gushed out. "Little brat, you!" The two guards screamed, and their eyes trembled. However, before they could finish their words, they felt a strong pressure from the sword, which made them feel suffocated. The two guards trembled and fell to the ground. Yetion took a step forward and glanced at the two guards with his cold eyes. The forbidden runes around him dissipated. He didn't kill the two guards, but he taught them a lesson so that they wouldn't dare to look down on him again. After all, the two guards were from the mansion. It would be inappropriate for Yetion to kill people from the mansion before he met the city lord. After taking care of the two guards, Yetion stepped forward and prepared to enter the mansion. However, at this moment, a strange change occurred. Blood! Suddenly, a deep roar sounded. Then, a figure shot up into the sky from the city lord's mansion. His aura was ferocious to the extreme, and a violent aura filled the air. Yetion looked in the direction of the roar and saw a tyrannical figure soar into the sky. But his limbs were chained by specially made iron chains. The figure abruptly stopped in midair. Chapter 1797. Yetion's expression darkened as he looked at the man in midair. The man's eyes were bloodshot, and he was clearly under the control of the blood fiend talismans. Blood! Right at this moment, the person in the sky roared again. His figure moved, and he slammed his palm down. A terrifying palm strike came crashing down towards Yetion and the others. "Watch out!" Yetion, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuzan simultaneously let out a cry of alarm, and simultaneously attacked with their swords. Three sword shadows soared into the sky like flood dragons, and unexpectedly merged together in midair, forming an even more terrifying sword shadow. This was the first time the three of them had joined forces, and yet they were very well coordinated. Rumble! A moment later, a muffled boom rang out as the palm and the sword projection collided and exploded, sending shockwaves out tens of thousands of meters in all directions. "What a strong person," Yetion said, falling back hundreds of meters, blood oozing out of the corner of his mouth. Face pale, he looked up at the ruthless man in the sky. On the other side, Jian Jingyun and Ghost Wushan were even worse off. They had been thrown back 1,000 meters and were covered in blood. Thankfully, they were only flesh wounds. The combined attack of Yetion, Ghost Wushan, and Ghost Wushan hadn't been able to block a single palm strike. This man was terrifyingly strong. Yetion sent out his divine sense, and was shocked to find that the man in midair was a late paramount god. No wonder his palm strike was so powerful. Thankfully, the man's limbs were bound by iron chains, which made it difficult for him to move. Otherwise, a single palm strike would have seriously injured Yetion and the others. "Blood!" he roared, and then blurred into motion as if he wanted to attack again. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with an instinctive thirst for blood. "Jingchun, stay your hand." At this moment, a low roar rang out. After that, a terrifying energy appeared in the air, directly wrapping around that person. After that, boundless energy gushed into that person's body, causing him to calm down. After a while, the berserker called Jing Chun gradually calmed down, and his figure slowly descended. Nye Tian was stunned. He looked at the black-clad cultivator who suddenly appeared in the air. It was this black-clad cultivator who had made Jing Chun calm down. The black-garbed warrior looked to be a middle-aged man with resolute features, sharp eyes, and powerful energy. Shockingly, he was a late paramount god, and his aura surpassed even Jing Chen's. "Who are you people?" The black-clothed cultivator's figure flashed and directly appeared in front of Nye Tian and the others. His gloomy eyes swept over Nye Tian and the others, and then his eyes fell on the two guards on the ground. His face suddenly changed, and he roared, "How dare you injure the city lord's people?" Nye Tian's eyes flickered for a moment before he calmed down. He looked at the man and said, "You must be the city lord, right? Since you know who this city lord is, why haven't you scrammed yet?" The black-clothed cultivator roared angrily. Although his eyes were filled with anger, he did not make a move. This black-clothed cultivator was none other than the Seven Dark Cities City Lord, Jing Li. "City Lord, please calm down. I'm just here to visit you," Nye Tian said indifferently, bowing slightly. "Injuring the City Lord's guards. Is this how you pay a visit to the City Lord?" Jing Li said coldly, staring at Nye Tian. He was shocked at the latter's calmness. "City Lord, this is just a misunderstanding." Nye Tian smiled faintly and did not explain too much. Since Jing Li did not directly attack, it meant that he was not someone who could not distinguish right from wrong. "A misunderstanding," Jing Li said coldly, his eyes locked on Nye Tian, as if confirming something. Nye Tian's face was calm, and then he said, "City Lord, the person who attacked us just now was controlled by the Blood Fiend runes, right?" Jing Li's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but be surprised. "You know about the Blood Fiend runes?" "I know a little." Nye Tian nodded with a smile and said, "Maybe I can help that person recover his consciousness." "Is what you say true?" Jing Li's eyes trembled, and he could not hide the heat in them. "Of course." Nye Tian nodded with a smile, his expression calm. Jing Li was stunned. After thinking for a long time, his figure landed, and he bowed deeply to Nye Tian. He said respectfully, "Mister, please enter the house." Nye Tian did not stand on ceremony and walked into the city lord's house. A moment later, Jing Li brought Nye Tian and the others to a remote place in the back courtyard of the city lord's house. Nye Tian saw a small courtyard in front of him, and he could feel the pungent smell of blood from far away. Following this, the group entered the small courtyard and saw the unconscious Jing Chun lying on the ground. Jing Chen's four limbs were bound by long metal chains, and his body constantly released a bloody and violent aura. "He is called Jing Chun, and he is my younger brother," Jing Li said heavily, his expression very serious. Nye Tian was slightly stunned. He had not thought that Jing Li and Jing Chun were brothers. No wonder Jing Li cared so much about Jing Chun. "Mister, do you really have a way to help my brother recover his consciousness?" Jing Li's eyes burned as he looked at Nye Tian, and he could not hide the excitement in his eyes. He originally did not believe Nye Tian, but when the latter mentioned the Blood Fiend runes, he had no choice but to believe. In the entire zone of darkness, there were very few people that knew of the existence of the Blood Fiend runes. "City Lord, I do not have complete confidence that I can help him recover his consciousness, but I have confidence that I can force out the Blood Fiend runes in his body so that he will no longer be controlled by the runes," Nye Tian said heavily with a nod of his head. "Mister, if you can help my brother force out the Blood Fiend runes, Jing Li is willing to do anything for Mister." Jing Li's eyes flashed, and he directly promised. Nye Tian faintly smiled and did not say anything. He took a step forward and came to Jing Chen's side. Everyone could not help but become nervous, afraid that Jing Chen would suddenly wake up and injure Nye Tian. Nye Tian's consciousness opened, and he carefully sensed the Blood Fiend runes in Jing Chen's body. His expression could not help but become heavy. "Mister, how is Jing Chun? Jing Li took a step forward, and seeing that Nie Tian's expression was not good, he could not help but ask nervously. His meridians and blood have already been completely taken over by the blood fiend runes. The power of the runes has devoured his consciousness, leaving him with only the simplest bloodthirsty killing intent, Nie Tian said heavily. The density of the blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body was even denser than he had expected. Jing Chen's consciousness was devoured half a year ago. At the time, I had no choice but to use the elven chains to lock him up. Jing Li nodded his head and said, with my strength, I can only help him suppress the blood fiend runes so that he will not go berserk. But once he smells the scent of fresh blood, he will suddenly go berserk and want to kill. Jing Chun had been controlled by the blood fiend runes half a year ago. It was by relying on Jing Li to suppress the blood fiend runes every day that he could live until today. In reality, the reason why Jing Chun had gone berserk just now was because Nie Tian had injured 2 guards, and Jing Chun had smelled the scent of fresh blood. City Lord, the blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body are too strong. I can only try and see if I can help him force out the blood fiend runes. Nie Tian looked at Jing Li and said heavily. Nie Tian had underestimated the density of the blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body. Now, he could only do his best. Jing Li nodded his head heavily and said, Mister, regardless of whether you succeed or not, you are this Jing's benefactor. Nie Tian took a deep breath and then took a step forward. His body began to release the power of the fiend gods. Chapter 1798. When Jing Li saw Nie Tian release the power of the fiend god, his expression changed and he was shocked. He had never imagined that Nie Tian was the legendary fiend god nascent embryo. Could he be? Jing Li stared at Nie Tian with burning eyes. He seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. But he didn't dare to disturb Nie Tian. He could only suppress the shock in his heart and watch quietly from the side. Jing Li was very nervous and ready to attack at any moment. If Jing Chun suddenly went berserk and attacked Nie Tian, he would definitely attack without hesitation. He knew that if Nie Tian's identity was as he thought, then Jing Chen's life was far less important than Nie Tian's. Nie Tian released the power of the fiend god. Like black tentacles, it slowly surged over and wrapped around Jing Chun. At this time, Nie Tian had the strength of a mid-stage high god. He had awakened 64 strands of the power of the fiend god. Just as the power of the fiend god completely enveloped Jing Chun, he suddenly woke up and let out a hysterical howl. His face became hideous and extremely terrifying. Under the effect of the power of the fiend god, the blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body instantly went berserk. They transformed into waves of impact that rampaged through his meridians and blood, almost tearing his body apart. When the crowd saw this, they immediately became nervous. Their hearts were in their throats, and they didn't dare to breathe too loudly. Bang! 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 At this moment, Jing Chen's body suddenly split open. Bloody holes burst open and blood gushed out. Jing Chun. Jing Li's pupils suddenly shrank as he cried out in shock. Nie Tian frowned slightly. Then with a thought, the power of the fiend god seeped into Jing Chen's body and circulated wildly. The power of the fiend god had an extremely strong ability to devour blood fiend runes. After entering Jing Chen's body, it began to madly absorb the blood fiend runes. After a while, the wounds on Jing Li's body actually began to slowly heal. Nie Tian sensed that it was about time and immediately withdrew the power of the fiend god. The moment the power of the fiend god was withdrawn, Nie Tian felt the blood in his body surge. His chest sank, and he violently spat out a mouthful of blood. Nie Tian, are you okay? Rui Qinyu saw this and quickly stepped forward, asking nervously. Nie Tian smiled and shook his head. I'm fine. The fiend god power had absorbed too many blood fiend runes, and the impact on Nie Tian's martial body was too great. That was why he had vomited blood. At this time, Nie Tian looked at Jing Chun. Jing Chen's eyes were no longer red and had returned to their normal color. Jing Chun. Jing Li stepped forward and hugged Jing Chun. He was extremely emotional. Jing Chen's gaze trembled slightly and gradually recovered its spirit. Looking at Jing Li, he actually opened his mouth to speak. Big brother, what happened to me? When Jing Chun suddenly heard Jing Chen speak, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He immediately wailed, Jing Chun, you're fine. The blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body had almost been completely absorbed by Nie Tian. At this moment, he had already regained his consciousness. However, his martial body was very weak, and he urgently needed a rest. Phew! Seeing Jing Chun recover his divine sense, Nie Tian let out a long breath. He was also very pleasantly surprised that the power of the fiend god had such an obvious restraining effect on the blood fiend runes. Jing Li helped Jing Chun untie the metal chains, and then sent the latter to his room to rest. After doing all this, Jing Li came to Nie Tian's side and said, Mister, let's go to the main hall. Nie Tian nodded. Moments later, everyone appeared in the main hall of the city lord residence. Mister, you saved my brother. Jing Li will never forget your great kindness. Jing Li bowed deeply to Nie Tian with a moved expression. Jing Chun had been controlled by the blood fiend runes for half a year. Jing Li had always helped him suppress the blood fiend runes, but he knew that this suppression wouldn't last long. Before long, Jing Chun would die from the torture of the blood fiend runes. Fortunately, Nie Tian had appeared and saved Jing Chen's life. City Lord is too polite. Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, Actually, I came to visit City Lord this time because I have some things I want to ask. Mister, please speak. Jing Li will definitely tell you everything I know. Jing Li nodded heavily, still unable to conceal the excitement in his heart. City Lord, can you tell me what's going on with the 7 dark cities? Nie Tian did not stand on ceremony and directly asked. Jing Li nodded slightly and said, In the zone of darkness, other than the obscure mountain range, there are also the 9 dark cities. The 9 cities are built around the obscure mountain range. I don't know who built these 9 cities. Anyone who enters the zone of darkness has 2 choices. They can either choose one of the 9 cities to live in or enter the obscure mountain range. The obscure mountain range is the true zone of darkness. The 9 dark cities are more like a world separated from the zone of darkness, and there are no blood fiend runes in the 9 cities. The 9 dark cities are no different from the outside world. So the majority of people who come to the zone of darkness will directly enter the obscure mountain range. Those people want an even more bloody world of slaughter. Nie Tian could not help but frown. It seemed that Jing Li also did not know why the 9 dark cities existed. Jing Li continued to say, Jing Chun and I came to the zone of darkness over 100 years ago. Later, due to a strange combination of factors, we became the city lord of the 7 dark cities until now. A year ago, Jing Chun entered the zone of darkness to gather information. Not long after he returned, he was controlled by the blood fiend runes. City Lord, have you not entered the obscure mountain range? Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he asked. I have, but then I returned to the 7 dark cities. Jing Li faintly nodded. He seemed to think of something, and the way he looked at Nie Tian also changed. Nie Tian did not notice the change in Jing Li's expression. He continued to ask, City Lord, do you know of the Black Lotus organization? Black Lotus? Jing Li's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. He thought for a moment, then asked, Mister, why do you want to know about the Black Lotus? Nie Tian smiled and pretended to be calm. Before coming to the zone of darkness, I heard that the real ruler of the zone of darkness is the Black Lotus, so I wanted to confirm it. I'm very curious as to what kind of organization the Black Lotus is. The Black Lotus? Jing Li pondered for a long time, then finally said, The Black Lotus does exist. The entire obscure mountain range is controlled by the Black Lotus. It is a very mysterious organization. When I first entered the obscure mountain range, I encountered people from the Black Lotus and was injured by them. After that, I returned to the 7 dark cities. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He had not expected the Black Lotus to be so strong. Jing Li was already a late paramount god, and, among the same level of martial artists, he was definitely an expert. Even so, He had been injured by the Black Lotus. The strength of the Black Lotus was shocking. Mister, I still don't know your name. Could you tell me? Jing Li's eyes flickered slightly, and he spoke in a low voice. Nie Tian noticed that Jing Li's expression was a little strange, but he did not take it to heart. He smiled faintly and said, I am Nie Tian. Chapter 1799. In the great hall of the city lord's residence, Jing Li's eyes trembled violently as he stared at Nie Tian in shock. Young master. When Nie Tian heard this title, he was stunned and couldn't react for a long time. Inexplicably, why would Jing Li suddenly call him young master? Jian Jingyun and the others who were watching from the side were also stunned. They had no idea what was going on in front of them. Young master, I didn't expect to meet you here. At this time, Jing Li was much calmer. He suddenly knelt down and respectfully said, This subordinate Jing Li did not know of young master's arrival and has offended you greatly. Young master, please punish me. Nie Tian looked at Jing Li in astonishment and quickly helped him up. He squeezed out a smile and said, City Lord, you must have recognized the wrong person. Jing Li stood up and sent a voice transmission to Nie Tian. Young master, you have a god-fiend essence embryo, and your surname is Nie. Your father is called Nie Fenghua, right? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his face stiffened. He couldn't react for a long time. After being petrified for more than 10 seconds, Nie Tian finally reacted and asked doubtfully, your father's subordinate? Nie Tian vaguely guessed that the Jing Li in front of him was the same as Yi Qinghai, a subordinate of his father, Nie Fenghua. Yes. Jing Li nodded heavily and said, This subordinate is Jing Li. Back then, Master saved my life, allowing me to have today's achievements. It is all thanks to Master that Jing Li can have today. Tens of thousands of years ago, the two brothers, Jing Li and Jing Chun, were the fist slaves of the arena. They were rescued by Nie Fenghua and left the arena. They got rid of their slave status and joined the Wind and Cloud Alliance. The day the Jing brothers left the arena, they swore to the heavens that they would treat Nie Fenghua as their master in this life. When something happened to Nie Fenghua, Jing Li and Jing Chun tried every possible way to search for her. Finally, they found out that Nie Fenghua might be imprisoned in the darkness, so they came here until now. The Jing brothers had been in the Dark Zone for more than 100 years. They had tried to find Nie Fenghua, but they hadn't found anything. Jing Chun had entered the Gloom Mountain Range to inquire about Nie Fenghua's whereabouts. That was why his body had been invaded by the Blood Fiend runes and became like this. When Nie Tian used the power of the God Fiend, Jing Li could tell that the former was using the power of the God Fiend origin embryo. Although Jing Li had never seen a God Fiend nascent embryo before, he had been by Nie Fenghua's side for many years. He was very familiar with the aura of the God-restricting fetus, and Nie Tian's God Fiend nascent embryo had an aura similar to the God-restricting fetus. Furthermore, it was much stronger than the God-restricting fetus, so he immediately guessed that Nie Tian had a God Fiend nascent embryo. In addition, Nie Tian's surname was Nie. This made Jing Li even more certain that Nie Tian was Nie Fenghua's son. After hearing Jing Li's words, Nie Tian let out a long sigh. He didn't expect to meet his father's friend here. Of course, Jing Li directly transmitted his voice to Nie Tian. Jian Jingyun and the others couldn't hear it. Jing Li calmed down and didn't avoid suspicion. He directly looked at Nie Tian and asked, Young master, did you come to the domain of darkness for master as well? Jian Jingyun and the others were stunned. They didn't know what Jing Li and Nie Tian talked about. How did their identities suddenly change from guest to master and servant? Nie Tian shook his head slightly and said, I didn't come to the domain of darkness for father. I'm here to look for someone. Who? Jing Li's eyes flickered. He couldn't understand who was so important that Nie Tian didn't hesitate to come to the domain of darkness. Southern Gui Wu, Lord Gui Wu Kwangsha. Nie Tian didn't hide it and directly said, Lord Southern Gui Wu. Hearing Gui Wu Kwangsha's name, Jing Li couldn't help being stunned and exclaimed. Seeing Jing Li's strange reaction, Gui Wu took a step forward and asked, City Lord, do you know where Master is? Jing Li's eyes flickered as if he was recalling something. After a while, he said, a few years ago, I met Lord Gui Wu Kuang in the 7 Cities of Darkness. Really? Nie Tian and Gui Wu were stunned. They couldn't help but look at each other and exclaim at the same time. Yes. Jing Li nodded and said, there aren't many peak paramount gods that enter the domain of darkness. Lord Gui Wu Kuang Sha stayed in the 7 Cities of Darkness for a few days before entering the Dark Mountain Range. There hasn't been any news of him since. Is that all? Gui Wu was stunned. He couldn't help but be disappointed by Jing Li's words. But there was one thing he could be sure of, and that was that Gui Wu Kuang Sha was indeed in the domain of darkness. City Lord, do you know why Lord Gui Wu Kuang came to the domain of darkness? Nie Tian asked calmly. I don't know. Jing Li shook his head. He wasn't familiar with Gui Wu Kuang Sha. There was no reason for the latter to tell him why he came to the domain of darkness. Young master, why are you looking for Lord Gui Wu Kuang Sha? Jing Li looked at Nie Tian and couldn't help but ask. Nie Tian didn't hide anything. He told Jing Li about the matter of the Sword Elder from beginning to end. Jing Li was stunned. He didn't expect there to be such a complicated process. The Dark Mountain Range is strange and unpredictable. Those who enter will either die inside or, after coming out, gradually become slaughterers controlled by blood fiend runes. Jing Li frowned and said in a deep voice, although Lord Gui Wu Kuang is very strong, he entered the Dark Mountain Range a few years ago, and there hasn't been any news of him. I'm afraid that by now, speaking till here, Jing Li shot a glance at Gui Wu Chan, not continuing to speak. Nothing will happen to Master. Gui Wu Can's eyes trembled. There was an unconcealable panic in them. He said, no matter what, I must find Master. Jing Li looked at Gui Wu Can and didn't say anything else. Nie Tian's face was gloomy. Gui Wu Kuang Sha had been in the Dark Mountain Range for such a long time. Although Jing Li was the city lord of the 7 Cities of Darkness, he knew very little about the Dark Mountain Range and the Black Lotus. If Nie Tian and the others wanted to find Gui Wu Kuang Sha, they had to enter the Dark Mountain Range themselves. Young master, are you going to enter the Dark Mountain Range? Jing Li looked at Nie Tian and couldn't help but ask. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. Since he had come to the Dark Region, he naturally had to investigate the Dark Mountain Range and the Black Lotus. In the Dark Mountain Range, not only was there Gui Wu Kuang Sha, it was very likely that Nie Tian's father was also imprisoned in the Dark Mountain Range. Young master, your strength is too weak. This subordinate can't let you enter the Dark Mountain Range. At this moment, Jing Li looked at Nie Tian and suddenly said in a deep voice, the Dark Mountain Range was too dangerous. Jing Li had personally entered the Dark Mountain Range and knew the dangers very well. Nie Tian only had mid-stage high god strength. Entering the Dark Mountain Range was tantamount to seeking death. Jing Li wasn't looking down on Nie Tian. It was just that the latter's strength was too weak. Jing Li, I know you're worried about my safety, but since I've already come to the Dark Region, how can I leave just like that? Nie Tian looked at Jing Li with a burning gaze. His whole body emitted an overbearing self-confidence. He said, I must enter the Dark Mountain Range. Jing Li could feel the determination in Nie Tian's eyes. It was as if he could see Nie Fenghua for back then. He couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 1800. Nie Tian looked at Jing Li, his eyes slightly darkening. He did not expect that Jing Li would enter the Dark Mountain Range with him. Jing Li was the lord of the 7 Cities of Darkness. He had a responsibility on his shoulders and could not leave the 7 cities at will. Jing Li, you are the lord of the 7 Cities of Darkness. You cannot leave at will, Nie Tian said gravely. I will be careful in the Dark Mountain Range. Young master, this subordinate. Jing Li was startled. He wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Nie Tian. You cannot leave the 7 Cities of Darkness. This matter is decided, Nie Tian said gravely, not giving Jing Li any room for discussion. He did not want Jing Li to risk his life for him, especially when the latter had a special identity. Jing Li saw that Nie Tian had made his decision. He thought for a moment and asked, Young master, when do you plan to go? Very soon. It should be in the next few days. Nie Tian nodded slightly. When Jing Chen's condition stabilizes, we will leave. Young master, if Jing Chen recovers, let him accompany you. Jing Li's eyes lit up. Nie Tian could not help but be startled. His eyes flickered, and he nodded. We will talk about it when the time comes. Jing Li could not leave the 7 cities of darkness, but Jing Chen could. Jing Chen's strength was slightly weaker than Jing Li's, but the difference was not that great. Moreover, if Jing Chen was by Nie Tian's side, the latter could check the situation of the blood fiend runes in his body at any time to ensure that he was normal. It was indeed a good idea to let Jing Chen accompany Nie Tian into the Dark Mountain Range. Jing Li saw that Nie Tian did not immediately refuse and could not help but faintly smile. He stepped forward and said, "Young master, you have just arrived at the 7 cities of darkness. Rest for a few days first." Nie Tian nodded and prepared to stay at the city lord's residence for a few days. Everyone walked out of the hall. Jing Li had people bring Nie Tian and the others to choose a small courtyard to stay in. Bang! But at this moment, there was a muffled sound outside the city lord's residence. A powerful palm force appeared and directly pressed down on the city lord's residence. Jing Li frowned, and his expression darkened, after which he took a step forward and soared into the sky. His aura surged, and he struck out with his palm. A green palm silhouette appeared. Boom! In the air, there was a loud sound as the 2 palms collided, stirring up billowing waves of air that surged in all directions. After a long while, the surging waves of qi in the air dissipated and a figure appeared in the air. A pair of cold eyes locked onto Jing Li. "It's him." When Nie Tian saw the figure in the air, he couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. The person who had suddenly appeared in the air above the city lord's mansion was none other than Zhou Chuyang. Nie Tian never thought that Zhou Chuyang actually came to the domain of darkness too. How could he know that Zhou Chuyang entered the domain of darkness precisely for him? "Who are you? Why did you suddenly attack the city lord's residence?" Jing Li's figure stood in midair. Cold, he stared at Zhou Chuyang and asked in a deep voice. He did not recognize Zhou Chuyang and did not know why the latter suddenly attacked. "You are the city lord of the 7 cities of darkness." The corner of Zhou Chuyang's mouth pulled into a strange smile. He said darkly, "Your strength is indeed not bad." Zhou Chuyang came to the domain of darkness. These few days, he had been staying in the 7 cities of darkness. He had always been looking for Nie Tian and the others, but did not find them. He was also very curious. Why would there be such a peaceful place like the 7 cities of darkness in the domain of darkness? At this time, he came to the city lord's mansion to borrow the power of the city lord's mansion to find Nie Tian. However, he did not expect that Jing Li's strength was actually so strong that it was not beneath him. This city lord will ask you again, "Who are you? What business do you have at the city lord's mansion?" Jing Li said in a deep voice, his eyes starting to turn cold. "City lord, I am called Zhou Chuyang, a member of the Zhou clan. This is my first time coming to the domain of darkness, and I wish to ask city lord for a favor." Zhou Chuyang said indifferently as he retracted his aura and lowered his posture. He intentionally mentioned the Zhou clan in order to make Jing Li somewhat fearful. Jing Li looked cold at Zhou Chuyang. Although he did not have a good impression of the latter, he still said, "What do you want this city lord to help with?" "Help me find a person." Zhou Chuyang smiled faintly. It seemed that mentioning the Zhou clan was somewhat useful. "Find a person?" Jing Li was slightly startled and said with a frown, "Find who?" Before Zhou Chuyang could speak, another voice rang out after Jing Li's words. "The person he is looking for is me." Nie Tian's figure moved, rushing into the sky and arriving beside Jing Li. "Stinking brat, you are actually here." Zhou Chuyang suddenly saw Nie Tian appear. His eyes suddenly widened, and he was extremely excited. He roared, "You really have great guts to actually dare to walk out by yourself." Nie Tianling smiled coldly. His gaze swept over Zhou Chuyang, and he said indifferently, "You think too highly of yourself. Do you really think that you are very powerful? Stinking brat, you are seeking death." Zhou Qiang's expression changed when he was ridiculed by Nie Tian. He then looked at Jingli and said, "City Lord, this person is an enemy of our Zhou clan. He killed people of our Zhou clan and escaped to the Zone of Darkness. Hand him over to me. The Zhou clan will remember this favor." Jingli's expression was dark. He had not thought that the person Zhou Chuyang was looking for was Nie Tian. Zhou Chuyang did not know the relationship between Nie Tian and Jingli. He casually mentioned the Zhou clan and wanted Jingli to hand over Nie Tian. It was simply laughable. "Young master, do you know this person?" Jingli's expression was dark. He turned to look at Nie Tian and asked respectfully, Young master?" When Zhou Chuyang heard Jingli address Nie Tian, he could not help but be stunned. His expression froze, thinking that he had heard incorrectly. "I do." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Before I came to the Zone of Darkness, I killed his nephew, but I did not think that he would chase me all the way here." As he spoke, Nie Tian looked at Zhou Chuyang and said, "You chased me all the way to the Zone of Darkness not for revenge, but for something on my body, right?" Nie Tian obviously knew that Zhou Chuyang had chased him not for revenge, but for the earth vein source in his body. He found it strange. Why did Zhou Chuyang want the earth vein source so much? For the earth vein source, he did not hesitate to come to the Zone of Darkness. "Stinking brat, you are not too stupid." Zhou Chuyang calmed down and sneered. He then looked at Jingli and said, "City Lord, I do not care what relationship you have with this brat, but I hope that you will hand him over to me. I think that you also do not wish to offend the Zhou clan." The Zhou clan. Zhou Chuyang once again brought out the Zhou clan, hoping to make Jingli fearful. However, Jingli sneered and looked at Zhou Chuyang with killing intent in his eyes. He said coldly, "I do not care who you are. Even if you are the head of the Zhou clan, don't think that you can take the young master away from my hands today." Asking Jingli to hand over Nie Tian, what kind of joke was this? Let alone the fact that the person who appeared was Zhou Chuyang. Even if the sacred president came, Jingli would not hand over the person. At this moment, not only would Jingli not hand over the person, he wanted to kill. He could tell that Zhou Chuyang coveted something on Nie Tian's body, so he chased him all the way here. Chapter 1801. In the air above the city lord's mansion, Jing Li's cold eyes were locked on his Zhou Chuyang, and he was surrounded by a suffocating killing intent. "Oh, you want to kill me?" Zhou Chuyang was taken aback when he sensed Jing Li's killing intent. Clearly, he hadn't expected Jing Li to want to kill him. He laughed coldly and looked at Nie Tian. "City Lord," he said, "you offended the Zhou clan for this kid. Is it worth it? You'll know when I kill you." The corner of Jing Li's mouth curled up into a cold smile, after which his figure moved and he directly made his move. His entire body emitted green yuan qi, and countless thorns appeared in the air. They were like giant snakes that smashed towards Zhou Chuyang. "Damn it!" Jing Li attacked directly, catching Zhou Chuyang off guard. He cursed in his heart and also attacked. With a palm strike, the surrounding space was instantly filled with dark dust. A huge palm formed from black sand appeared. It had a vast aura and was extremely terrifying. Seeing the two of them attack, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he quickly retreated. Jing Li and Zhou Chuyang were both late-stage paramount gods, and their battle was earth-shattering. With Nie Tian's strength, he would be injured if he got within 10,000 meters of them. The spectators were shaken to the core, and their eyes trembled. It was rare to see two late-stage paramount gods fight to the death. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the two terrifying forces collided. It was like two mountains had collided, and a terrifying explosion rang out. Shockwaves spread out in all directions, and the entire sky was thrown into chaos. The ground was struck by the powerful force, and a wave of dirt rose up. What power! The spectators on the ground felt a suffocating pressure, and their chests tightened. Inwardly, they cried out in shock. The power of a battle between paramount gods was indeed extraordinary. Nie Tian retreated another 1,000 meters, and then he steadied himself, his eyes trembling. Seeing the battle between Jing Li and Zhou Chuyang, he realized that his current strength was still too weak. As of now, Niet Tian could fight an early Paramount God with his 3 forbidden magics and other trump cards. But that was the limit of his fighting prowess. If he ran into a mid-Paramount God, Niet Tian wouldn't be a match for him. Against a late Paramount God, like Zhou Chuyang, there was no way he could fight him. The only thing he could do was flee. In the Supreme Realm, the gap between each minor realm was like the distance between the heavens and the earth, like an insurmountable chasm. Moreover, even among supreme god martialists of the same level, the difference in battle prowess was very obvious. Bang! At this moment, a muffled sound suddenly rang out in the air. Zhou Chuyang was hit by a thorny thorn, and his figure retreated several thousand meters. In the next moment, countless thorny thorns surged over like a tide, wanting to swallow Zhou Chuyang. Although Zhou Chuyang and Jing Li were both late Paramount gods, Zhou Chuyang's battle prowess was obviously weaker than Jing Li's. In the first clash between the two, Zhou Chuyang's defeat was obvious. Damnation! Zhou Chuyang growled. He reached out with his palm, and a claw of black sand appeared, blocking the thorny thorns in front of him. Zhou Chuyang retreated again, just barely dodging Jing Li's attack. Die! However, at this moment, Jing Li's silhouette had already arrived. He slammed down with his palm, and instantly thousands of thorns intertwined together, forming a thorny dragon in the air. It roared at the sky and then rolled down, attacking Zhou Chuyang. Zhou Chuyang's gaze darkened and his expression changed. He had not thought that Jing Li's murderous intent was so heavy that he wanted to kill him at all costs. Jing Li was convinced that Zhou Chuyang would be a threat to Niet Tian's safety, so he would kill him no matter what. You want to kill me? Not so easy. Zhou Chuyang suddenly raised his head and growled. Then, the black sand around him surged and wrapped around him, forming a huge shield of black sand around him. You're looking to die. When Jing Li saw this scene, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Zhou Chuyang's actions were equivalent to trapping him. Bang! In the next moment, the dragon of thorns whizzed past, and its huge dragon claw slammed down, creating a huge hole in the shield. Then, the dragon of thorns pressed down, and the shield collapsed. It turned into black sand that filled the air. But strangely, Zhou Chuyang's figure did not appear. Zhou Chuyang had disappeared into thin air. And Jing Li stepped on the dragon of thorns, and his divine sense spread out, but he could not find any trace of Zhou Chuyang's aura. Cunning, Jing Li growled. Zhou Chuyang must have used some sort of space-time formation to escape. He had wanted to kill this powerful enemy for Niet Tian, but he had still let him escape. Niet Tian watched from the side. After confirming that Zhou Chuyang had left, his figure moved, and he came to Jing Li's side. Jing Li saw Niet Tian come and quickly bowed, saying in a low voice, "Young master, this subordinate is useless. He escaped." So what if he escaped? Niet Tian smiled faintly, not minding. He did not care whether Zhou Chuyang escaped or was alive. What he cared about was why Zhou Chuyang was so obsessed with the earth vein source. For the earth vein source, Zhou Chuyang had followed Niet Tian to the domain of darkness. He was really going all out. Jing Li, let's go back first. Niet Tian saw that Jing Li was fine and smiled faintly. His figure landed, and he returned to the city lord residence. In the next few days, Niet Tian stayed in the city lord residence and did not go out. Jing Li sent people to search the entire city, but did not find Zhou Chuyang. It seemed that the latter had already left the 7 cities of darkness. He might have gone to another city, or he might have left the domain of darkness. In these few days, Niet Tian treated Jing Chen once a day. At this moment, the blood fiend runes in Jing Chen's body had been completely removed, and his strength had also recovered. Jing Chen knew the true identity of Niet Tian. He was very happy to be able to accompany Niet Tian into the domain of darkness. With Jing Chen's strength recovered, Niet Tian planned to immediately leave the 7 cities of darkness and go to the Dark Mountain Range. However, Fat Cat told him that Dishur Tian's body would recover in a few days, and it was better to wait for Dishur Tian's body to recover before going to the Dark Mountain Range. Niet Tian readily agreed. He also wanted to see what sure Tion's body would look like after recovering and how strong he would be. 3 days later, in the small courtyard of the city lord residence, Tion stood in the courtyard. In front of him was a crystal-clear whirlpool of ice crystals, constantly rotating, and the entire courtyard was covered in ice crystals. Fat, this is sure Tion's body. Tion looked at the ice crystal whirlpool in front of him and asked in astonishment. Of course not. Fat Cat chuckled and said, Don't worry, sure Tion's body is in the ice crystal whirlpool, and it will be reconstructed soon. You just wait to see a good show. Tion nodded slightly, and his eyes couldn't help but become scorching. Okay. After a moment, Fat Cat let out a strange cry, and his eyes trembled. The whirlpool that was rotating at an extremely fast speed slowly stopped, and then slowly split open like a bird breaking out of its shell. Crack! With a crisp sound, the ice crystal whirlpool split open and then split into two halves. A crystal-clear figure appeared in front of Tion. Chapter 1802. In the small courtyard, Tion looked at the scene in front of him. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say anything for a long time. In front of Tion was a sparkling and translucent little doll that looked to be 5 or 6 years old. It was chubby and looked like it was carved from jade. It was extremely cute, making people want to pounce on it and take a few hundred bites at a glance. This is Sakura. Tion finally reacted after being stunned for more than 10 seconds. He said with a stunned face. And yes, Fat Cat nodded heavily with a very proud look. It seemed that he was very satisfied with the body that he had reconstructed for Sakura. Long, Chinchilla Boss, this joke is too big. Sakura also reacted at this time. He looked at himself with a stunned expression. His little face twisted together, and he was about to cry. He was the dignified, heaven-slaughtering demon sword, a powerhouse at the peak of swordsmanship, and a murderous demon that made people tremble with fear hundreds of thousands of years ago. Now, he actually became a 5 or 6 years old little doll. Moreover, he was so cute. How could he accept this? What? Are you not satisfied? Fat Cat frowned. He was obviously unhappy. No, I don't dare. Sakura's little face twisted together. The bitterness in his heart was about to overflow into a disaster. If he was like this after his rebirth, it would be better to let him maintain the state of a remnant soul. At this time, Rui Chinyu and the others suddenly came and entered the small courtyard. Wow, what a cute little brother. Rui Chinyu saw Sakura and couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Hey, where did this child come from? Gue Wukong was also surprised when he saw Sakura. He immediately stepped forward and reached out to pinch Sakura's chubby face. After that, he was still not satisfied and pinched a second time and a third time. Sakura's eyes widened and stared straight at Gue Wukong. If his eyes widened even more, his eyeballs would pop out. He was the dignified, heaven-slaughtering demon sword, but he was actually pinched here and there by Gue Wukong. It almost made his lungs explode. If not for the fact that Gue Wukong was Tion's friend, Sakura would have already lashed out in rage. Seeing this, Tion nearly burst out laughing. Hastily taking a step forward, he signaled to Gue Wukong to stop before going too far. What a powerful sword intent. At this time, Jian Jingyun suddenly discovered something strange. He stared at sure Tion, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He didn't care much at first, but when Sakura was angry, he suddenly sensed an unusually terrifying sword intent from the latter. This sword intent was much more terrifying than Tion's sword intent. Among all the people that Jian Jingyun had met, only the Jian clan head, his second grandfather, Jian Qingxiu, had a sword intent that could compare with it. Jian Jingyun couldn't believe it. How could a 5 or 6-year-old child's body contain such a terrifying sword intent? Tion's eyes slightly narrowed, and his eyes trembled. Taking a step forward, he asked in astonishment, Sakura, what's your current strength? After Sakura was reborn, Tion was stunned by his small appearance, so he didn't pay attention to his strength. Now that he sensed Sakura's sword intent, his heart was filled with shock. Sakura's pure eyes flickered, and with a childish voice, he said, early-stage paramount god. This. Everyone was stunned, and their expressions froze. They were petrified on the spot. A 5 or 6-year-old child opening his mouth and saying that he was an early-stage paramount god. How could they accept this? Sakura's voice was also very strange. Although it was very childish, it was also very vigorous, giving people a very heavy feeling. When these two temperaments appeared together, people couldn't help but laugh. How is this possible? Goei Wukon finally reacted. He also sensed the aura on Sakura's body, and he was definitely not talking nonsense. What's going on? Jian Jingyun asked in astonishment, his voice trembling. He was a calm person, and it was very rare for him to be shocked to this extent. Most importantly, a 5 or 6-year-old early paramount god with a powerful sword was simply too terrifying to contemplate. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun had no idea that Sakura wasn't a 5 or 6-year-old child, but an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Only an early-stage paramount god. Nie Tian became cold and looked at Sakura with some dissatisfaction. He originally thought that after Sakura was reborn, he would have the strength of a peak paramount god. Only an early-stage paramount god, which was far from what Nie Tian had expected. Sure, Tian, let them witness your strength. Little Fat Cat suddenly let out a weird laugh and said with a complacent look. Sakura looked up at Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun, and the corners of his mouth curled up, making him look even more adorable. You two, let's fight together. We'll just compete with sword intent. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun glanced at each other, and their eyes immediately became blazing hot. They could feel the strength of Sakura Heaven's sword intent. Being able to compete with this kind of swordsman sword intent was very beneficial to their comprehension of the sword Tao. All right, the two of them roared in unison and then retreated, putting a distance of dozens of meters between them. Let's do it, Sakura said, clasping his hands behind his back. He had the demeanor of a grandmaster. Nie Tian almost laughed when he saw Sakura's actions. Nie Tian, who is this kid? Thousand Leaves, who was standing beside Nie Tian, couldn't help but ask worriedly. They won't hurt him, right? She could sense that Sakura was an early-stage paramount god, but she didn't have much understanding of sword intent, so she didn't know how terrifying he was. Moreover, in terms of size, Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun were indeed bullying the weak. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He was very confident in Sakura. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun looked at each other, and then nodded. They attacked at the same time, and the two sword intents fused together, turning into a sword shadow, whistling toward Sakura. Nie Tian slightly frowned. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun had a tacit understanding, and under the fusion of their sword intents, their power increased by several times. In this kind of situation, even if he used his sword intent with all his strength, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. Nie Tian's eyes shone and locked on his Sakura. He wanted to see how the latter would deal with the joint sword intents of Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun. Too weak. When the sword intent was less than 5 meters away from Sakura, Sakura spoke in a cold voice, and his face was full of disdain. His body shook, and a sword intent pierced through the air, and the sword shadow was like wind and lightning, exuding a desolate aura. Puff! Immediately after, the two sword images collided with each other. However, a shattering sound rang out. Sure, Tian's sword image seemed weak, but it was actually extremely terrifying. It directly shattered Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun's combined sword attack. The sharp and cold sword intent rushed towards the two of them. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun sensed the ice-cold killing intent, and their faces couldn't help but change, revealing a terrified expression. But that life-threatening sword shadow, when it was less than 10 meters away from them, suddenly stopped and directly disappeared. Goei Wukon and Jian Jingyun sucked in a breath of cold air, and their foreheads were already covered with beads of sweat. If Sakura didn't stop, it would be enough to kill the two of them on the spot. Chapter 1803. Unity of Sword and Martial Arts. This is definitely the realm of unity of sword and martial arts. Nye Tian came to his senses and couldn't control himself as he exclaimed. Sakura Heaven's sword intent was so strong, and it was so natural that he could completely control the sword intent. Only a swordsman at the peak of the god realm, who had fused sword and martial arts into one, could achieve this. His guess was right. The current Disher Tian was the one who fused sword and martial arts into one. Sword and martial arts as one. The sword realm at the peak of the immortal realm. The martial artist and the sword intent became one. At this moment, the sword artist was the martial artist, and the martial artist was the sword. Disher Tian's physical body was reconstructed and he obtained a new life. Although his martial body was a little young and his strength had not recovered to its peak, his sword Dao realm was perfectly preserved. The realm of sword and martial unification. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also reacted and cried out in alarm in unison. Their faces were filled with shock. Nye Tian, Disher Tian isn't just an ordinary sword and martial fusion. He's at the legendary realm of sword and martial fusion. Fat Cat couldn't help but laugh complacently when she saw Nye Tian and the others' shocked faces. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He didn't quite understand what Fat Cat was saying. Fat Cat glanced at Sakura, who took a step forward and said, "For a God Realm swordsman, the realm of unity of sword and martial arts is divided into 4 small realms, namely, the primary unity of sword and martial arts, the intermediate unity of sword and martial arts, the advanced unity of sword and martial arts, and the peak unity of sword and martial arts." Hearing this, Nye Tian was once again dumbfounded. He had not heard of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan were also stunned, and they were speechless for a long time. Sakura's gaze swept over Nye Tian and the others as he said, "There is a kind of swordsman who can comprehend the true meaning of the sword and surpass the pinnacle of the unity of sword and martial arts. This kind of swordsman is the legendary swordsman who combines sword and martial arts into one." You! Nye Tian was stunned all of a sudden. His throat couldn't help but roll as he said, "Disher Tian, you're the legendary swordsman who fuses sword and martial arts into one." Sakura nodded slightly. His small appearance was extremely lovable. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan stood rooted to the ground, unable to utter a single sound for a long time. Even though the two of them teamed up, they still lost to a legendary swordsman who had fused sword and martial arts together. It was not shameful at all. On the contrary, they should be very proud. Throughout the 9 realms, if it was purely a contest of sword intent, perhaps no one was Indra's opponent. Sakura had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, plus the time he existed as a remnant soul. He was probably older than those old monsters. When he was in the state of a remnant soul, Sakura's strength did not improve, but he was still comprehending the sword Dao, and his understanding of the sword Dao increased day by day. Following by Nye Tian's side, Sakura had a new understanding of the way of the sword. From Nye Tian, he saw an even more terrifying potential of the way of the sword. After a long time, Nye Tian calmed down a little. He looked at Disher Tian and asked, "Disher Tian, what do you think of your current combat strength?" Sakura hesitated for a moment and said, "If I go all out, my battle prowess should be above that person from the Zhou clan, but I may not be able to beat that city lord." Nye Tian's eyes flickered, and he was pleasantly surprised. Sakura only had the strength of an early-stage paramount god, but with the help of his powerful sword Dao cultivation, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with a late-stage paramount god. This was already very abnormal. Sakura's current battle prowess was above Zhou Chuyang, but below Jing Li. In fact, what limited Sakura's current battle prowess was not his strength, but his martial body. The body of a 5- or 6-year-old child had not yet matured, which greatly limited Sakura's battle prowess, making his martial body far weaker than ordinary paramount god experts. Gue Wuchan and Jian Jingyun nodded solemnly. Both of them firmly believed Sakura's words. "Boss Chinchilla, my body won't always be this big, right?" At this time, Sakura came to Nye Tian's side, looking at Fat Cat with pitiful eyes, and asked cautiously. Sakura was very arrogant in front of others, but in front of Fat Cat, he had to be respectful. Although his martial body had recovered and his strength had become stronger, he still wanted to pursue a higher realm. Fat Cat knew the secret of ascending to the Saint Realm, so Sakura was very respectful to her. Fat Cat let out a strange cry. Her figure moved, and she fell into Sakura's arms. A 5 or 6-year-old toddler hugging a plump, fat cat. This scene was simply stunning. But who would have thought that the child was once the heaven-slaughtering demon sword, and Fat Cat was the omniscient 9-tailed chinchilla? Fat Cat laughed and said, "Your body is normal. Just like other children, it will slowly grow up, and your strength will also increase as your martial body grows up. I estimate that when you are 15 or 16 years old, your strength will reach the peak of the paramount god level." Sakura couldn't help but be a little nervous while holding Fat Cat. He nodded and said, "Thank you, Boss Chinchilla." Sakura was about 6 years old now, which meant that in about 10 years, his body would be close to that of an adult, and his strength would be restored to its peak. From the early stage of the paramount god level to the peak of the paramount god level in 10 years, this speed was absolutely abnormal. But Nyetion still felt that Sakura's strength increase was still too slow. After all, the latter was originally a warrior at the peak of the paramount god level. Fat Cat laughed and said proudly, "Sakura, from now on, you will follow Nyetion and live in the 9 extremities world. You will be the master of the 9 extremities world, and you can take all the exotic flowers and plants there and eat them as you please." "Thank you, boss." Sakura's eyes flashed, and he hurriedly expressed his thanks. He knew that the exotic flowers and plants in the 9 extremities world were treasures of heaven and earth, and it was really a wonderful thing to be able to live there. Fat Cat laughed again and said, "Sakura, with your strength growing in the 9 extremities world, I'm a little curious about how abnormal you will be in the future." The 9 extremities world was the world that Nyetion had created, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and the power of God were extremely rich there. Growing up in such an environment would be of great benefit to Sakura's martial body, and it would also determine the heights he would reach in the future, which would be unimaginable. "Sakura, I actually have a way to help you recover your strength quickly, but it may not be good for you." Fat Cat raised his eyebrows and suddenly said, "What way?" Nyetion and Sakura asked at the same time, both very curious. Fat Cat's figure flashed, and he came to Nyetion's shoulder and said, "Actually, it is very simple, and that is to let Nyetion speed up the flow of time in the 9 extremities world, so that you can grow faster." Speed up the flow of time? Nyetion was stunned, and he didn't quite understand what Fat Cat meant. Fat Cat nodded and said with a smile, "Since the 9 extremities world was created by you, you only need to compress the universe lines, and you can speed up the flow of time." Universe lines? Nyetion stared blankly again, and then he understood. Universe lines, also known as timelines. As long as Nyetion said timelines, it was equivalent to speeding up the flow of time. If he compressed the universe lines by 1-fold, the flow of time would increase by 1-fold, and 1 year in the 9 extremities world for Sakura would be equivalent to 2 years in the outside world. However, Nyetion had never done something like compressing universe lines before, so he really didn't have much confidence. Chapter 1804. Fat. Is it really good for Sakura to grow up by forcibly accelerating the flow of time in the 9 extremities world? Nyetion frowned and asked Fat Cat. "Not good." Fat Cat nodded and said, "Although accelerating the flow of time can help Sakura recover his strength faster, it will also make his martial body weaker than ordinary people. And when he reaches the peak of the paramount god realm, his martial body will be too weak, and it will not be good for him to break through to the saint realm." "Boss Chinchilla, I want to grow up slowly." Sakura immediately became nervous when he heard that it was not good for him to break through to the saint realm. In his previous life, he failed to break through to the saint realm and ended up as a remnant soul. Now that he was reborn, he finally had the ability to break through to the saint realm again. Of course, he had to be extra careful. It's good to grow up slowly. Anyway, it's only 10 years. It's just a snap of a finger. Fat Cat smiled and moved, returning to the origin embryo space. Sakura entered the Nine Extremities world, but Fat Cat stayed in the origin embryo space because he wanted to use the power of the demonic god Ocean to grow nine tails as soon as possible. Then, Nyetian took out the Nine Extremities world and let Sakura enter. Nyetian, what is this? Rui Chinyu saw the Nine Extremities world in Nyetian's hand and couldn't help but frown and ask curiously. Nyetian gave a simple explanation, and Rui Chinyu and the others were stunned. Who would have thought that Nyetian had created an independent world? Sakura had been successfully resurrected. Nyetian decided to go to the Dark Mountain Range the next morning. The next morning, Nyetian and the others appeared outside the gate of the Seven Cities of Darkness. Jing Chun, you will go with the young master to the Dark Mountain Range this time. You must protect him. Jing Li's eyes swept over Nyetian, then fell on Jing Chun and nodded. Don't worry, big brother. Jing Chun nodded and said, I owe my master and the young master a life. Even if I die, I will not let anything happen to the young master. Yes. Jing Li nodded slightly, but his expression was grave. He felt uneasy about not being able to accompany Niet Tian into the obscure mountain range. Jing Li, don't worry. I'm not a 3-year-old kid. I'm sure I'll come back safely from the Dark Mountain Range. Niet Tian smiled faintly. Then he thought of something and said, I wonder where Old Hai and the others are. If we're lucky, we might be able to meet them. When Yi Qinghai left the Heaven Realm's divine region, he headed for the darkness region. Niet Tian had asked Jing Li before, but the latter did not know that Yi Qinghai had also come to the domain of darkness. Perhaps Yi Qinghai had directly gone to the Dark Mountain Range after arriving in the realm of darkness, and did not stay in the 7 dark cities. Niet Tian was very worried. He had been separated from Yi Qinghai for a long time. If the latter had really come to the darkness realm, it would have been several years. He did not know if Yi Qinghai would be able to resist the invasion of the Blood Fiend runes for several years. Jing Li, you should go back. We're leaving. Niet Tian did not stay any longer. After bidding farewell, he turned and walked towards the Dark Mountain Range. Jing Li stood in the same place, looking at the backs of Niet Tian and the others. His face was slightly solemn. Young lord, there are many slaughterers on the outskirts of the Dark Mountain Range. We must be careful. Soon, the group arrived outside the Dark Mountain Range. Jing Li reminded Niet Tian. The slaughterers were those who had been invaded by the Blood Fiend runes and lost their minds. When Niet Tian and the others had just arrived at the darkness region, they had already fought with the slaughterers. Those people were not very strong, but they were bloodthirsty and very difficult to deal with. Niet Tian nodded slightly and let Rui Qinyu stand in the middle of the group. At this moment, Rui Qinyu only had the strength of a mid-stage high god. Without using the rainbow pupils, her combat power was limited. The group did not hesitate and directly entered the Dark Mountain Range. After entering the Dark Mountain Range, Niet Tian could clearly feel the existence of the Blood Fiend runes in the air. However, he was the only one who could feel it. The others could not. Even a late-stage paramount god like Jing Chun could not sense the Blood Fiend runes. Only when the Blood Fiend runes had accumulated to a certain extent would the warriors be able to feel it clearly. The group moved forward cautiously and slowly entered the hinterland of the Dark Mountain Range. Young lord, no one knows exactly how big the Dark Mountain Range is. When I first entered the mountain range, I went to a place called Black Wind Cliff. It is a place where people gather. It is said that Black Wind Cliff is a stronghold of the Black Lotus. Jing Chun told Niet Tian some information about the Dark Mountain Range as they walked. However, he had only heard about these things and could not be sure. Jing Chun continued. According to the rumors, the Black Lotus has 72 strongholds and 36 branches. Black Wind Cliff is only a small part of the Black Lotus. Lord Jing Chun, since Black Wind Cliff is a stronghold of the Black Lotus, wouldn't we be able to find the people of the Black Lotus by finding the master of Black Wind Cliff? Gue Wutsan asked in confusion. It's not that easy. Jing Chun shook his head slightly and said, I have been at Black Wind Cliff for several months and have been secretly asking around. I have not seen anyone from the Black Lotus. The Black Lotus is indeed a mysterious organization. Nietion frowned and murmured, "Young lord, take a look at this." At this moment, Jing Chun handed something to Nietion. Nietion took it and saw that it was a black petal. He did not know what material it was made of, but it looked simple and had a strange aura. Nietion went blank for a moment before asking, "What's this? Why was at Black Windcliff last time? I fought with a man in black. He injured me, but I snatched this petal from him." Jing Chun recalled and said, "I guess that the man in black is very likely to be from the Black Lotus. This petal might be some kind of token of the Black Lotus." Nietion's eyes slightly narrowed. He sensed the aura of the petal, but he did not find anything unusual. "Young lord, keep this black petal. Maybe we can find it in the future." Jing Chun nodded and said with a smile. Nietion did not stand on ceremony and kept the black petal. "Jing Chun, let's go to Black Windcliff first." Nietion looked at Jing Chun and said in a deep voice, "Okay." Jing Chun nodded and walked at the front, running wildly. The group shuttled through the forest at a very fast speed. "Strange, why is it so quiet here?" Jing Chun, who was at the front, could not help but feel puzzled. Ever since they entered the dark mountain range, they had not met a single slaughterer. This was too strange. The slaughterers were everywhere in the dark mountain range. They were simply killing machines that walked in the mountains. However, after Nietion and the group entered the mountain range, it was surprisingly quiet. However, at this moment, Nietion seemed to have sensed something and suddenly shouted, "Watch out!" Almost at the same time, Jing Chun's expression suddenly changed, and the aura around him surged. Boom! In the air in front of them, a flaming arrow appeared. It was like a flaming dragon, rolling forward. Everywhere it passed, the trees were burned to ashes. It was as if the whole world was on fire. Chapter 1805. Young master, step back. Jing Chun sensed that something was amiss and roared. Immediately, the aura of his body skyrocketed. He stomped on the ground and flew up. He struck out with his palm. The huge palm shadow was like a shield of a mountain, crashing down. Nietion frowned slightly. He spread his wings and retreated with Rui Qianyu. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also reacted quickly and retreated quickly. Boom! Bang! The next moment, the flame arrow fell from the sky and hit the center of the huge palm shadow. A terrible roar sounded, followed by a muffled sound. The mountain-like palm shadow was directly penetrated, and the flame arrow directly pressed down on Jing Chun. Jing Chun's eyes narrowed. He wanted to strike out with his palm again, but it was too late. The flame arrow was like a giant snake, pressing down on him. Suddenly, a scorching aura spread out, and the surrounding space of tens of thousands of meters became a furnace. Bang! Immediately, a muffled sound was heard. Jing Chun's figure flew out like a kite with a broken string, and his whole body was burning. Jing Chun. Seeing this, Nietion screamed. He flapped his wings and flew over. An ant with the strength of an upper deity wants to save people. At this moment, a low roar came from the void. Immediately, a line of fire appeared and instantly spread into a sea of flames in the air, rushing towards Nietion. Nietion was still thousands of meters away, but he felt a suffocating pressure. However, he did not retreat, but directly rushed over. While still in air, he turned his palm, and a space-time vortex appeared in his palm. It was the Nine Extremities world. "Sakura, stop him!" Nietion roared, and immediately rushed towards Jing Chun. "Okay." Sakura's voice sounded. Immediately, a ball of golden light gushed out, like a golden fireball, directly whizzing towards a sea of flames. In the void, a surprise voice sounded, and it seemed to be very shocking. When Jian Jingyun and the others saw the golden fireball in the sky, they were stunned. Their expressions were indescribably complicated. That golden fireball was a small beast whose entire body was glittering with golden light. Its body wasn't big, about 10 meters long, and on top of the golden beast's head, Sakura's figure stood upright. Although he had the appearance of a child, he had an aggressive aura. "Kill!" Sakura growled, and a long sword appeared in his hand. The The body of the sword was bigger than him, and with a thrust, countless golden sword shadows appeared, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. In the surrounding space, a terrible sword intent surged. Rumble. In the void, rumbling sounds rang out continuously. Two powerful forces collided with each other, and a terrifying aura spread in the space. On the other side, Nietian caught Jingchun. The latter's entire body was burning with flames, and he was actually on the verge of death. The strength of the person who attacked was too terrifying. With the power of one arrow, he directly injured Jingchun. However, this was also because Jingchun attacked hastily and did not display his true strength. The person who attacked was a spirit arrow martial artist. His strength should be similar to Jingchun, around the late paramount god level. A spirit arrow martial artist with this kind of strength could directly lock onto a target from tens of thousands of meters away or even hundreds of thousands of meters away. In contrast, Jingchun had counterattacked in a situation where he was defenseless and was at a disadvantage. If they were to fight head-on, Jingchun might not necessarily be a match for the opponent. Nietian's whole body surged with a sword intent, extinguishing the flames on Jingchun's body. Then, a wave of power surged out of his palm and entered Jingchun's body. Young master, Nietian directly used the power of the Terra Source. The powerful life force immediately woke Jingchun up, and the wounds on his body immediately healed. His complexion also improved a lot. Jingchun, are you okay? Nietian sensed Jingchun's aura. It had already stabilized, and it seemed that his life was not in danger. Jingchun stood up, bowed, and said, "Young master, I am incompetent. I have frightened you." Jingchun was too polite. It made Nietian a little uncomfortable. Nietian said, "You rest first." With that, Nietian looked in the direction of Sakura Heaven. Up in the sky, Sakura Heaven and a black-garbed man were facing each other. Their auras were extremely powerful, and they were staring at each other with cold, killing intent. Nietian swept his divine sense over and found that the black-garbed man was indeed a late paramount god, just like Jingchun. Judging from his aura alone, the black-garbed man should be about as strong as Jingchun. However, the sneak attack just now had seriously injured Jingchun, and he couldn't fight anymore. "Who the hell are you?" The black-garbed man's eyes flickered as he looked at Sakura Heaven, puzzled. How could he have imagined that the person who blocked his sword was a 5-year-old child? Sakura Heaven's appearance had completely subverted his understanding of the martial Tao, and he couldn't accept it. "Who the hell are you?" Sakura Heaven said in a cold voice, but his childish voice weakened his aura, making him sound a little funny. "You're courting death, you little bastard." The black-garbed man's eyes darkened, and then he flew into a rage. He could tell that Sakura Heaven was only an early paramount god, and a look of contempt appeared in his eyes. "You're the one who's courting death." Sakura Heaven wasn't the least bit afraid. He took a step forward, and his figure towered high in the sky, like a sharp sword. At that moment, the black-garbed man's figure flickered, and a huge bow appeared behind him. It was 1,000 meters long, and he drew it. All the power in his body surged out, forming a flaming arrow. Seeing this, Nietian's eyes narrowed, and he couldn't help but feel a little worried. If the black-garbed man released an arrow, Sakura Heaven wouldn't be able to withstand it. Sakura Heaven's battle prowess was strong, but his most fatal weakness was that his martial constitution was too weak. Perhaps Sakura Heaven's battle prowess wasn't below Jingchun's, but his martial constitution was definitely several levels lower than Jingchun's. At most, it was on par with Jian Shocloud and Ghost Wuken. Therefore, even if Sakura Heaven blocked the arrow, the explosion would still be enough to seriously injure him. What a joke. Do you think I'll give you a chance to attack? The corners of Sakura Heaven's mouth curled up into a sinister smile. Cold, his figure flickered, and he stabbed out with his sword. The sword image was like a mountain, majestic and powerful, moving with incredible speed. This sword strike had both speed and power, which was enough to show the strength of Sakura Heaven's sword Tao. The black-garbed man felt the powerful pressure of the sword, and his face couldn't help but change. His eyes trembled, and the arrow that hadn't been completely condensed shot out. Boom! The sword image and the arrow image collided. Sakura Heaven's sword strike was obviously stronger, and the flaming arrow was directly shattered. Not good. The black-garbed man's eyes trembled, and he sensed that something was wrong. He screamed and quickly retreated, but he was still a step too late. Puff! The sword image flew past, and the aftershock reached the black-garbed man. The sound of flesh being cut could be heard, and the sharp sword intent directly chopped off one of the black-garbed man's arms. Leave! The black-garbed man growled, and his figure moved, turning into a black light, and disappeared into the void. Sakura Heaven stood in midair and didn't chase. Nyetion stared at the severed arm in the air. His figure moved, and with a wave of his hand, there was one more thing in his hand. It was a black petal. This black petal was taken from the black-garbed man's severed arm, and it was exactly the same as the black petal that Jing Chun took out earlier. Nyetion looked at the black petal in his hand, and his face couldn't help but change. He cried out a name in his heart, Black Lotus.